Good morning, Stephan.
Hey, give me just a second.
You bet. All right, folks. Like I said, this is Stephan Kinsella.
This is weird. When I opened up my headphones, they broke in half physically. So let me see if this works. I've got a half a dangling headphone. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, sound great.
Okay. I think it's fine. I just have a dangling headphone on the right side, but I think I can work through it and buy a new one later.
Well, at least
Plantronics Chinese crap.
at least it's not video. Then we won't have to worry about it. The
Yeah.
of course we get in here and the stupid system has to be rebooted and updated, and it's just typical. Whenever I have an important guest.
I understand.
Yeah.
I totally understand.
All right, Stephan. We here. My name's Joshua Bennett, and the guest host is Michael Kinsella.
Anderson.
Or Michael Anderson. Gosh, I'm already.
Yeah, my brother's actually Michael Kinsella, so you
Well,
confused me.
that would have been good. He's in Alaska visiting. So we often, as we talk about private property society and different things like that, law comes up over and over and over, and people I think mix up what we would call political law, positive law, and also common law and
Yep.
and natural law.
Yep.
I was just wondering if you could start by giving a brief description of the three, and then we can just go into what's good
Sure.
and what sucks.
Yeah, and there's also economic law. So, I
Right.
mean, we use the word law to refer to basically the regularity of some kind of phenomena that we can classify and understand in a systematic way, right? So, the word law is a broad word. Moral. We talk about moral law and the things you should or shouldn't do, uh, which you could say is a subset of natural law, which is the study of the right and wrong of the way that we should act, right? Have economic laws, like the law of supply and demand. You have physical laws like the law of gravity. So these are all different in a sense, but they have something in common, which is why we use the same word. And then we have also legal laws, or just what we normally use the word law to mean, right? So a law against speeding or a law against committing murder. So these are different type of laws, and I would say that one of the main differences is one field is prescriptive. That is, it prescribes action. It tells you what you should or should not do, and it basically says if you choose to do this, right? Now, choice is important here. Then there's going to be a consequence. Like if you choose to commit murder, or if you choose to sell cocaine, then there's a high chance or some chance that you will go to prison for a certain number of years, something like that. So that's more of a prescriptive law made into the legal realm. Okay. Now, regular moral laws is like you should not uh, disrespect your mother or your grandmother or whatever. And if you do, there will be social consequences, but not. It's not really like a legal consequence. So that would be one type of law, more of a natural ethical law. Right? Law
Yep.
of physics is that there's a relationship between gravity and attraction and mass and these kinds of things.
Right.
Okay, so that's just a descriptive law. Instead of prescriptive, it's descriptive. And economic laws are also descriptive, but the other difference here is that we learn about what the physical laws are by empirical observation and empirical testing, the scientific method. But the laws of economics and even of logic and mathematics, we learn by reasoning and by deduction. Okay, so you have these different types of fields or domains of law, and different methods of analysis are appropriate to each of them.
Hmm. Interesting. That's good. The with the is I've listened to you a lot, obviously, and you talk a lot about finding law. I wonder if you could describe that a
Yeah,
little.
yeah.
Talk
So
about
so
it some.
now we're talking about the domain of I'll just call it law mostly from now on, but I call it legal law when I'm distinguishing between economic laws, physical laws, even moral laws. But yeah, the laws we think of as being enforced in society. So you would think of a law is a rule that prescribes consequences for breach of the rule, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's and now in in the beginnings of human society, these laws arose by custom and by common sense and by negotiation and contract and agreement. And then they developed over time through court systems, basically. In ancient Rome, 2,500 years ago to 1,500 years ago, roughly, the Roman legal system was developed in this way. And then, a little bit after that, the common law system of England was also developed in this way, where, two people who had a dispute would come to a court and ask for a resolution to their dispute. And the court would look at all the relevant facts they could find. You would take testimony, you'd have witnesses, you'd have other kinds of evidence. You would apply established legal principles that had been developed before, and they would come up with a ruling in an attempt to do justice. It wasn't perfect. It was influenced by the state, but it was at least the rough workings out of a rudimentary legal system. And over hundreds of years, bodies of law developed that are quite sophisticated in the common law and the Roman law, right? Which have rules which we resort to figure out who is going to be the winner in a dispute. Okay. Now you have also criminal law and family law and things like that, but basically it's contract, property, disputes about people hurting each other, who gets to pay each other what, who was responsible, things like that. So this is the type of law that we have. Now, over time, with the emergence of democracy in the state, the amount of laws that were made by legislation instead of by this decentralized process started becoming greater, right? So you had basically in the 20th, 19th, and 20th centuries, you had legislation started becoming the predominant mode of making law. Mm-hmm. And to the point where it's such a dominant force in law today that even your average libertarian or just your man on the street, when they think of law, they think of a statute, which is legislation. They think of a piece of paper with rules written on it by a sovereign legislative body like Parliament or Congress, right? Yep. Or the legislature. So we've started to think of law as whatever the government says it is, instead of the result of a slow, gradual process where we attempted to find what was the just result. Now it's been perverted and corrupted to thinking of law as a written. And by the way, you see this mirrored in the contract field. A contract is just a binding agreement between two people, okay? Mm-hmm. But people think of a contract as a piece of paper with words written on it. Okay, because everyone's become what we call legal positivist in the law. They think of the rules that are in effect as whatever someone in an official capacity has enunciated or stated, the sovereign, the king, the legislature, the judge, whoever. When what they say goes. So we start thinking of law as just obeying the commands of someone that has arbitrary power. Okay, right. So you see this is corrupted contracts. Contracts do not need to be written. They don't need to even be verbal. They can be just merely oral or just merely contextual or implicit. And likewise, law does not need to be written down. In fact, I would argue that law that is written down tends to be not law. Right. Okay, law that is developed over time in a process, a decentralized process where people are seeking justice and trying to develop rules that are common sense, practical, and apply to situations and take into account custom and expectations of the parties. This is the common law or the Roman law. That tends to mirror our natural law libertarian assumptions of justice. But when you have a committee of bureaucrats or politicians sit down and just announce what the law is going to be, there's no reason to think that this law would have anything to do with justice. So the problem is that when you have law thought of as statute or legislation, then the job of the judge becomes not to do justice in a given case between two parties. His job is to interpret the words that were written down by some committee previously. And that might be unjust. In fact, it usually is unjust. Mm-hmm. So the job of the judges on the Supreme Court in the U.S., or the job of federal judges usually, is simply to take a statute that Congress wrote and read it, try to figure out what it means, and apply it to the situation and just go on with their business. They're basically civil functionaries. They're like robotic computers with no sense of justice at all. I mean, their sense of justice might nudge them one way or the other when there was a gray area, but basically their job is not to do justice. Their job is to interpret words written by a committee of statist bureaucrats. So I don't actually regard federal judges in the U.S. as real judges. They're not judges. They're just agents of the state who dress up. They cloak themselves in the regalia of previous judges, and they pretend like they're judges, and they pretend like what they're interpreting is law. But all they're doing is reading words written down by the state legislature, and they're applying them to a given situation. And if the result is unjust, so be it. They have no choice.
So the purpose of law should be to produce justice, correct?
That is the whole purpose of law. So the purpose of law is to come up with a set of rules that we can consult when there's a dispute, so that we can resolve the dispute in the most just manner. Which means, and every dispute is always, because we're human actors. This is the insight you get from Austrian economics, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek. All human interaction and all human action has to do with the employment of scarce means. That is, rivalrous, scarce resources in the world. We employ these things to get things done, but the nature of the world and the nature of human interaction in society is such that when we use these resources, there's a possibility of violent interpersonal conflict over the use of the resource. And if we can't figure out who's going to be able to own this resource, then the only thing left would be violent conflict, and we wouldn't be able to have society or civilization or cooperation or the division of labor and peace and prosperity. So the whole purpose of law is to put in place an institutionalized set of rules which seek to reduce conflict by specifying in a fair, just way who the owner of a resource is whenever there's a conflict. That's the entire purpose of law. That's the entire purpose of rights.
Would you say, in your opinion, was America founded in common law? Because we have a lot of people who call on and say, "Hey, if we just get back to that Constitution and common law." I wonder what your opinion is on that.
Well, it's complicated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's how I would summarize it. Yeah, so you had the Roman law from say 500 BC to about 500 AD, and it was an amazing, complex, nuanced body of law. It was codified by the Emperor Justinian, and it was preserved and found later. So thank God we did that. And it later had an influence on our modern legal systems and in the common law. The common law started developing in England and the England territories later, and it was also a very long period of law. So those two bodies of law are very complex, subtle. The Roman law affected the common law. And then, of course, the United States was an English colony. So yes, the 13 colonies had their own variants of English common law, which was to their benefit, just like Australia and India and New Zealand and Canada today. Okay,
right.
So you will see that some of the most prosperous countries in the world, India is an exception because they were not part of the same heritage, but they actually benefited from the English language and the common law being imposed on them. But it never, I wouldn't say it quite ever took, because they were definitely a foreign culture. But New Zealand and Canada and Australia, I don't know if you know about this, but the U.S. and England, or the U.S. and U.K. and New Zealand and Australia and Canada are part of what's called the Five Eyes program. So these five Anglo countries trust each other so much that they share secret spy information with each other. It's called the Five Eyes program. Yep. Anyway, but it's not a coincidence, I believe, that these are some of the most prosperous and liberal and modern countries in the world. When the U.S. Seceded from England, from the U.K., well, I guess Great Britain. It wasn't U.K. yet; it was Great Britain. When the U.S. seceded and they won the Revolutionary War, yeah, they maintained the private English law, the common law in the states, but they then adopted the Constitution, which was a new innovation, modeled in part upon the Roman government system, the Senate, all these kinds of things, partly on the British system, the Parliament, where we replaced the House of Lords with the Senate, things like this. But the innovation was to write the Constitution down in writing and to regard that as the Constitution. And a lot of the provisions of the Constitution were based upon the accumulated English public law, like the Magna Carta, the rights, the division of powers, even some Roman law principles. The problem is it became the Constitution. I would distinguish between the common law. The common law is beautiful and gorgeous and mostly libertarian. This is the private law that most of us deal with on a daily basis. Right. It's illegal to commit murder. Your property rights are to be respected. If you hurt someone accidentally, then you owe them restitution. The private law. The private law is based in the common law, and it's largely compatible with libertarian principles. Federal law is based upon federal judges interpreting the Constitution, which is a written document. And a lot of the principles embedded in it were compatible with libertarian ideas like civil liberties, the right to free speech, the right against double jeopardy, things like that. But the problem with the Constitution was it basically set up this federal Leviathan, which was supposed to have limited powers, and it failed. The limits on its powers were supposed to keep it from becoming tyrannical and too large. It obviously has failed. So the Constitution, in my mind, was a mistake. I think even the Declaration was a mistake. I think the U.S. would be better off now, and England would be better off now, and the world would be better off if we had never seceded from Britain. But that's a counter historical sort of supposition. We'll never know for sure.
And would be a fun show to talk about sometime.
Right. Yep.
Well,
yep.
What was the difference when you can read stuff from the 1700s or whatever, and these guys talked about their rights as Englishmen and the English Constitution and stuff, but they didn't actually have a written Constitution. Whoa.
No, they didn't, and this is part of the sort of poisoning of the American mind by the Constitution in America. It's made and by the prevalence of legislation, as I said, it's made us think of law as being what's written down. So we don't think there can be a Constitution if it's not written down, because that was our experiment. That was the U.S. experiment in 1789. Well, there was a previous, the Articles of Confederation, but basically we decided we're going to write it down to make it certain. Anyone who's a lawyer, especially someone who's written contracts, will realize that you can never have a complete contract, right, and you could never have a complete written constitution. The American mind, especially nowadays in the 20th and 21st century, when we're so used to legal positivism, we're so used to the idea of thinking of law and the Constitution, it's what's written down on some piece of paper. We have a hard time thinking of the English Constitution because it's not written, as you just said, and as I had a hard time accepting it first. But there's a famous book by Dicey, the Constitution of England, and the Constitution. If you think about the word Constitution, I mean, there used to be a word. In the morning, I wake up and I take my constitutional, which means my daily walk, or what constitutes this thing, what makes it up. So right. Constitution just means the framework of something, what makes it up. And in England, there's like a deep body of tradition and practices and common law precedents and understandings by the people that constitutes what the Constitution is. It was basic, and then you could have lawyers or scholars or historians summarize this in a book saying, look, we've studied this all. Here's our summary of what the English Constitution is. Just because it's not written down in an official proclamation of the Parliament doesn't mean it's not the existing practice in that society, right, in that system. Right. So there is an English Constitution. In fact, I would say in every country, or in most countries, there's a Constitution. Some of them are written, some are not. And in fact, in the U.S., probably 95% of the actual practice of what goes on in Congress and in the federal government and in the interplay between the states and the feds is not written down in the U.S. Constitution. It's outside of that. Right? I mean, you know, the Social Security, let's just say Social Security, for example, is clearly not authorized in the federal Constitution because the federal government was supposed to only have enumerated powers, and there's nowhere in fact, the entire federal regulation of guns is not. See, the Second Amendment, I think, was a mistake in a sense because you don't need the limitations on what the feds could do because they didn't have the power in the first place.
Right.
So everyone says, oh, the
Right.
Second Amendment is only a right of the states to have militias. It's not a personal right. Okay, well, even if that's correct, the Ninth Amendment says that the failure to enumerate a right in the first 8 amendments doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So you can't make that argument anyway. You have to find an enumerated power of the federal government in the Constitution to regulate guns or to regulate health care. But they haven't. But we have these systems that are in place for a century now or more, right? Federal regulation of firearms, federal regulation of the environment, federal regulation of health care under Medicare and Social Security, things like that. And none of them are legal. None of them are supported by the Constitution. When presidents go to war without consent of Congress, that's illegal. And yet the Constitution is too brittle, and it either had to break or it had to bend. And the people that construe the Constitution and enforce it are the judges that work for that government. So, of course, they're going to interpret it so that it can bend, not break. Because if it breaks, they're going to be hung or screwed, right?
Right.
Like Ceausescu in Czechoslovakia. I mean, so what we have now is we have a large body of unwritten rules. We have an American Constitution, and 95% of the American Constitution is not what is written down in the written Constitution. So all countries have an unwritten Constitution.
Well, even good countries like North Korea have written constitutions. The Soviet Union had a written constitution that guaranteed all kinds of rights.
Well,
supposedly.
yeah, and regarding the gun rights and Social Security and Obamacare and all of that, it was all, the Social Security and Obamacare was all authorized supposedly because it's a tax, and then the gun.
Yeah.
Right.
And then bans on weapons. Well, you get a tax stamp if you want a fully automatic weapon. So now they use the tax clause again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I actually think that I think Obamacare, that part of it is probably constitutional, even though I hate it, because we have the Congress does have taxing power in the Constitution, and once you can tax, I mean, the Supreme Court said this: the power to tax is the power to destroy.
Right.
If you think about what the Fed does, they tax the people according to the 16th Amendment and other taxing power in the Constitution, and then they have the spending power. That's also in the Constitution. So then what they say is we're going to give the money back to the states in block grants for federal highway funding, and if you don't change your internal state law to do what we want you to do, like raise the drinking age from 18 to 21, or raise your speed limits from 55 from 75 or 85 to 55, like in the 70s, we're going to deny you these funds. I mean, I think those are actually probably all constitutional, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, they know very well how to wield that tool because they do a very good job destroying.
Yeah, Alaska is one of the worst.
Yeah.
They love that
federal
dollar.
Yeah, Alaska is considered the second most socialist state in the country, and the only reason it survives this way is because it takes so much federal money.
Got to wear your seatbelt. Got to get those federal funds. So I imagine that you're not in the company of folks that say if we could just get back to the Constitution.
Well, I think that if we could get back to the Constitution, it
would be better.
It would reduce the size and scope of the federal government. Not much. I mean, to a certain degree, it would. But there are provisions in the Constitution that would allow them to get around almost everything. The Interstate Commerce Clause, I think, is unfortunately broader than we would like to believe it is. I think that maybe there's something to the argument that if the feds have the power to regulate interstate commerce, they can regulate a lot of things touching it under the Necessary and Proper Clause, which is the argument in the famous New Deal case, Wickard v. Filburn, right, where the court told a wheat farmer that he couldn't grow his own wheat and consume it for himself and his own family and animals because that meant he would buy less wheat from other people across state lines, and that would have an effect on interstate commerce in the aggregate, like if everyone did that. So the logic is not insane. It's just that it's sort of the natural outcome of interpreting these arbitrary and pro-state rules that are put in place. So yes, I would be in favor of a more which is why I'm in favor of Trump over Hillary, because I think the judges he's going to appoint, by and large, will be an order of magnitude better, or maybe we say less bad, than Hillary Clinton's judging would have been. So, but these guys work for the federal government. They're not going to kill the thing that pays for their pension. In the end, they might be a little bit more principled, but in the end, they have to support the state's mission, which is to exist and to keep taxing us and to keep controlling us. But so the more interesting question is, how libertarian would be a world that was in full compliance with the federal constitution, even though it's completely naive to think that the federal government would ever respect the limits set out in that, because it's not in their interest to do so. So that's the naive part. You can't expect them to limit themselves.
Right.
This is one reason why I'm a strong believer in federalism and nullification, even more radical than, say, Tom Woods and these guys. I think that the states should be viewed as independent countries, and the federal government should be existing at their pleasure. Mm-hmm. In my view, according to the original constitutional scheme, the states have the absolute and sole discretion and right to disobey and to nullify any federal law, even if it's not unconstitutional. That is, even if the state just doesn't like it, that's all that matters. Because ultimately the states have a right to secede.
Right.
Right. And that means that they can just, if they have to, they can just leave the union and say, look, I'm just not going to be part of this because the federal government is not doing the little yapping dog that we created has become a monster and it's not obeying our commands. So we're going to leave this union. We're going to leave it behind. They have that right. They have the right to just nullify any federal law. I think they have the right to arrest and physically stop any federal agents whatsoever from doing anything on state territory that they want, even if you don't make an argument that it's unconstitutional, even if you don't make an argument that it's illegal, even if it's legal. So I take the most extreme decentralist, federalist, or maybe anti-federalist view.
Well, it's not that far off, I don't think, to reality. I remember when I lived in Idaho years ago, we had a sheriff that just laid it out in the newspaper one day that, it was 20-some years ago, so it was in the newspaper. Any federal officers that come into my county will be arrested on the spot if they are armed. And they pushed it, and some BLM guys walked into his county with pistols, and he threw them in jail, and nothing happened to him.
Yeah, but I think those things you can, in an institutional setting with the central government having so much power. I mean, look at Sheriff Joe Arpaio, which I would not say is a libertarian hero,
Right.
but it's an example of state versus federal power.
Right.
This guy defied the federal courts, and he was a populist sheriff, ostensibly enforcing federal immigration laws, and he got put in jail for contempt of court or whatever it was, and it required a presidential pardon to get him out of jail, but you can't count on that on a regular basis, and so you do have this dominating effect of the central state over the states. But my point is that the only thing that you could count on in a constitution would be the strong federalism, decentralization, balance of powers in a vertical way that our Constitution seemed to try to set up, but even that failed, and that was one of the best attempts you could imagine doing. I mean, you could rewrite the Constitution now with the benefit of hindsight of the last 200 plus years, and you could try to cover all the things that all the statists and socialists have used to get around the rules, but they would just find another way to get around the other rules. This goes back to the point that a contract can never be complete, right, because you can never envision every future possible scenario. So you have to have a rule of reason or a good faith principle that is assumed behind it, but that's never there in the case of pure statutory law, when the judge's job is to interpret the words written down on the paper and not to do justice. I think we should stop calling judges judges. They're not judges. They're basically they're enforcers of state rules. That's all they are. They're functionaries of the state. They're not real judges. Now, state judges are different. Right. I would say state judges largely still interpret the common law, or they interpret state legislation which was modeled upon common law rules. So a large swath of the private law of the states, that's the contract law, property law, tort law, marriage law, things like that, they are roughly they're trying to do justice within the framework of the state's corruption of this earlier law. But the federal judges are almost never doing real law. They're just interpreting federal statutes, which are largely unjust.
Yeah. Do you ever come across folks that I think they don't necessarily call themselves this, but they're the sovereign citizens, where they say, well, the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and if you're not we just had a fellow, and it's actually something when I was in my teen years, I unfortunately got involved with. But the if you're not a citizen, then those laws don't apply, and you can just tell that cop that. Yeah. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I know these people, and they have all kinds of zany conspiracy theories about whether your name is in capital letters on a court brief, and whether there's a gold fringe on the flag, meaning we're under admiralty jurisdiction. And the problem with these guys is they have a Protestant mentality as opposed to Catholic, right? So and by that I mean, so the Protestant, if you think about this, Brian Doherty from Reason Magazine wrote some great stuff on this a few years ago, which I have some blog posts about. You just Google it. It's something called it's so simple it's stupid, or something like that, or it's so. These guys essentially believe in a magical view of the universe where we can cast spells, right? If you say the magic words, then you can force reality to bend to your will. So if you go in front of a judge and you say, hey, judge, I've trapped you because I looked into this income tax code and I can't follow its bizarre tracings. I can't see any clear command that says I have to pay income tax. And then they'll say something like, and not only that, I saw an interview with one of the congressmen or maybe the former commissioner of the IRS, and they called it voluntary. Oh, so therefore, judge, you can't put me in jail. And guess what? Irwin Schiff is in frickin' jail. Yeah, so these guys have a magical view, an incantation view of things. They think that you can – and that's because they think of law as written down. So they think it's like if a bunch of friends get together and they want to play Dungeons and Dragons or Monopoly or Yahtzee or whatever, or Scrabble, what do? You get the rule book out and you follow that rule book because everyone wants to play the game and have a good time. Mm-hmm. So we want to follow the rules. We want to know what the rules are. We want to follow them, and they're presumably designed for the game to be fun or to be enjoyable or to be whatever. And they think of law that way too because they have been brainwashed or propagandized by the government's takeover of law in the form of legislation into thinking of law as legislation. So they start thinking of law as words on paper, which is the Protestant connection, because Protestants think of Christianity as the Word of God is only what was written in that Bible, sola scriptura. Right. Whereas the Catholics had more of a triad view. They view it as the oral tradition, the written scripture, and the Catholic Church's magisterium, that is the ability to interpret it. So you have this sort of three-legged stool, which is sort of like the American legal system, right? You have the legislature writes it down, you have the common law tradition, and you have the Supreme Court that can interpret it when new things come up. So the Catholic sort of view is less legal positivistic in that sense. The Protestant mentality tends to be, God said it, I believe it, that settles it. That kind of simplistic country hick view. Do you know what I mean? Yep. And anyway.
No, I was just thinking one of the last interviews I watched you give a speech during the question and answer. That was kind of, I just remembered a few of the questions that got asked you was that along those lines.
Yeah, and so, but they think of this Constitution as this. First of all, they bought into the American propaganda that the American founding was this great beacon of liberty. It was quasi-libertarian. I mean, come on. You had these guys that were drafting slaves and drafting peasants to fight in their war. They were killing people that disagreed with seceding from England, right? They got power in the government and they got lands and all this kind of stuff. They were taxing people. They were inflating the currency. They were shooting deserters. George Washington was stealing the teeth out of his slave's mouth to put in his mouth. I mean, this is it's grotesque. Okay, you can maybe say there's a historical context here, but let's not pretend it was a libertarian utopian ideal. The American founding was not. There are aspects of the U.S. Constitution, because we inherited them from the British common law tradition, that are very libertarian. Okay, there's no doubt about that. But let's not pretend that this was some American. So you have these common law court guys, right? These sovereign citizen types,
Right.
and they'll run around filing common law court liens on judges' property and things like. They just try to throw a monkey wrench in the system, which I appreciate. But that's more anarchist than sovereign citizen, right?
Right.
But they view the Constitution almost like they view the Bible. It's like the Word. It's the Word that we have. America was great. God was great. Christianity was great. God put it down in the Bible. The Constitution is the word of our founding fathers. They were great. Let's ignore the fact that Jefferson was screwing his slaves and that, they were drafting free men. Let's ignore all that.
Right.
Right. And so they think that if you just can put this piece of paper in front of the judge, it's like that scene in that movie Tucker, about the guy, Jeff, what's his name? The guy that had the innovative automobile in the 50s,
right?
Tucker.
Yep.
Tucker, a man in his car, and he was in the court, and he had like 50 of his cars on the street down below to prove that he actually had production, so he wasn't scamming people. And he just wanted the jury to stand up and look out the window and just see it, and the judge wouldn't let them because it wasn't according to the rules of evidence. He's like, just come look and see. If you just stand on this window and look outside, you'll see the cars are there. They're there right now. But the judge wouldn't let them see that or consider that. And I almost feel like it's that kind of zeal that these common law court guys have. Is they think if they hold a piece of paper up really close to the judge's eyes and they make him stare at those words, he will have to obey the spell, right? And release them. And well, I guess you proved me right that there's no income. The judge doesn't care whether it's right or wrong. It's not his job. His job is to just stay in power, not get disciplined by his superiors, not get impeached, not be locked up himself if he goes too far. And he's going to follow the law. And if like 100 people have gone to federal prison in the last 30 years for income tax evasion, and that's the regular practice, he knows he's safe.
Yep.
He knows that's what everyone's expecting. Mm-hmm. He can't buck the system. If he bucks the system, he will be wrinkled out. It'd be like an iron going over a wrinkle on a shirt. He'll be gone. We all know this, and we all know this. So I think these guys, they're well-hearted. I am on their side in a justice way.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that's the way to fight the system. Look, on occasion, we can find a glitch or a loophole in their complicated series of laws. For example, I think you could make a really good legal argument that copyright is unconstitutional because copyright clearly conflicts with freedom of speech, the First Amendment.
Right. The
courts have recognized this. But what they say is, well, copyright is authorized by the Constitution and free speech is in the Constitution in the First Amendment, right? And so they're both part of the Constitution, but they're in conflict with each other. So therefore, the judges have no choice but to do a balancing test and try to balance them out. This is the problem with statutory laws that it's not always coherent and organic and incompatible. Like you have parts that are incompatible with each other. Like, for example, antitrust law and patent law are incompatible because the patent law grants monopolies to people and the antitrust law says it's illegal to have a monopoly. And so if you grant someone a monopoly, the government grants someone a monopoly and they start having a monopoly, now they might be in danger of violating the antitrust law that the government has imposed. So the courts have no choice but to try to balance them out and say, well, okay, you can have a little monopoly if the government gives you one, but you can't abuse it. So they'll say that kind of crap, And it's the same thing with copyright and free speech. You could say the courts have recognized that we have absolute freedom of speech under the First Amendment, enacted in 1791, ratified in 1791, right? But that's incompatible with what copyright does, which is it penalizes you for saying what you want to say or for publishing what you want to publish.
Right.
It basically outlaws you publishing certain books, which would otherwise be a violation of the First Amendment. So the courts say, well, that's based upon the copyright clause from the 1789 Constitution, so we have to balance them out. So you can have some reasonable regulations on free speech and freedom of press in the name of copyright, but you can't go too far. But what you could argue is that, well, yeah, but the reason we have alcohol was prohibited was because we changed the law in 1921 or whatever. And then and then we changed the Constitution a few years later when we realized it was a mistake. Okay, so we changed it. So we got rid of prohibition. But that principle is the idea of chronological superiority. In other words, the legislature can change the law. The Constitution can be amended, and the later amendment takes precedence, right? Well, if you think about copyright was authorized in 1789 when the Constitution was ratified.
Yep.
The Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791, 2 years later by a different Congress. So if there's a conflict, that means that the copyright clause should govern. The free speech, the First Amendment should govern.
Right.
Which means copyright law should be unconstitutional. So you could make this argument, and it's not a crazy common law court type. It's not like the arguments these guys make.
Right.
It's actually a respectable argument. Some people have proposed it, but they let it go because they know that as a practical matter, the courts are never going to do that. It's been settled for 150 years or 100 years, whatever. They're not going to buck the system. They don't have any interest in doing it. So you could make some arguments on occasion. Like the Heller argument was probably the best example. Finally, after 200 years, we put the Second Amendment in the front of the judge's eyes, and 5 of them had to say, yeah, you're right. There are some limits on what the federal government can do to firearms regulation or gun regulations. So on occasion you can use it, but
well, even that was arbitrary, right? They could have just went the other way.
Well, what they could have done was they could have said, forget the Second Amendment. The Constitution has a list of enumerated powers of what Congress can do, and I don't see anywhere in here the regulation of firearms. So all federal – now, that would mean, by the way, that state regulations of firearms are constitutional from the point of view of the federal government. So if you take a federalist view, you have to take the good with the bad, and that would mean that the federal government does not have the right or the power or the authority to prevent states from outlawing guns, which I believe, actually. I don't think the federal government has the right to stop the states. I mean, look, in 1791, when the Bill of Rights was enacted, 2 years after the Constitution was ratified, Massachusetts and a couple of other states had an official religion. It was called Congregationalism, type of Protestant religion. So it's the idea that the First Amendment was meant to apply to the states or any of the Bill of Rights is ridiculous. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no act. In other words, the federal government cannot interfere with religion. And part of the reason for that was because they wanted the states to have the right to do that. Now, as a libertarian, I'm not in favor of the states having that power, but that doesn't mean that the federal Constitution should be the mechanism to stop it.
And having the feds out of the way, we have theoretically a little bit more input or power to sway states, right?
A lot more. I actually, if you think about it, democracy is not a very good protector of rights because, your right to vote doesn't really help you that much. I might vote every election. I might vote for the candidate that I think lowers my taxes the most. But guess what? My taxes go up every year. However, if the states were the main engine of law and order in America, and they still are to a certain degree, I can move from Texas to Louisiana.
Right.
I can move from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania or whatever. I can just get up and move. And the power of moving with your feet, and if you have the one good thing about the federal Constitution is the negative aspect of the Interstate Commerce Clause, which has been interpreted to mean that, or the dormant, it's called the dormant IC clause. It means that it basically established a free trade zone within the U.S. So it established freedom of movement of goods and people within the U.S. And I think that's the reason the U.S. is the most powerful nation in the world is because of that one aspect of our Constitution. We established a huge free trade zone across a large growing country with natural resources and with a population that was relatively homogenous. We had the English tradition. We're same language, same common law heritage, etc. I think that's the key to America's success, to be honest, is the Interstate Commerce Clause is abolishing of trade barriers and movement barriers. And that also goes along with political freedom because if you can just move from one state to the other, that puts severe limits on the growth of taxation and regulation and other bad policies in a given state because if you do it, you're just going to lose population. People will move.
Right,
and that's a much stronger limit on state power than democracy, I believe.
Yeah, Yeah, in Alaska, you would be, if you are into firearms, Alaska would be the place to move because we have, as long as it's made in Alaska, anything goes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And you're talking about markets for law, um, and the way I see it is that the federal government having complete dominion over law is no less communist than them having complete dominion over the food supplies.
Right.
I mean, they're
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, that's
yeah.
the point that, Hans Hoppe, there's a great article some of your listeners might enjoy. It's one of the best articles by Hans Hermann Hoppe, who's a leading Austrian libertarian scholar, and it's called Banking in Nation States, and I forgot the rest of it, but it's on his website, hanshoppe.com. And he points out that what the state does over time is it systematically tries to co-opt various aspects of society to gain control. So what they do is they want to basically control the population and bribe the population, and so they do it with a variety of mechanisms, right? So they monopolize security and defense. The King's Army will protect you,
Right.
and then they tax you, and then they monopolize education. They say, oh well, the government has to educate the people. Then they monopolize the roads, so they can control transportation. They monopolize communications, like the FCC in the U.S., right? Then they monopolize law, and they monopolize government itself through democracy. What they do is they auction it off, so everyone thinks, oh, my brother-in-law might work for the government, I can vote, I have a say-so in the government, I'm part of the government. They basically, if the king taxes you too much, you can go kill the king. But if we're all part of the government, if the government is us, if we're the state,
Right.
who do you kill? Your neighbor, your brother-in-law, yourself? And then finally they monopolize money by gradually taking over gold and making central banks and having paper money. So they insidiously control all these areas of life: education, defense, policing, and law, right? And government functions itself, right? And money. So it's not like there's one guy in charge of the state, but this is the natural tendency of this organization. It's in their interest, and they're good at that, unfortunately.
They've done a great job. So how do we? There was one thing that you mentioned. You said the word organic, and I was curious. Is there a difference? Because I've heard Judge Napolitano talk about the difference between common law and what he called natural law or organic law.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that a little?
I don't know if I've heard that particular comment by him, but probably he was comparing common law and natural law on one side to statutory law or state law, because the common law I would see is like a cousin of, or as an outgrowth of, a natural law philosophy. They complement each other. Natural law goes along with the common law philosophy. What it doesn't go along with is the idea of making law by edict of the king or the legislature, which is statutory or legislative law. Now, I don't know if he's gone deep into that, but he's pretty radical. He's very savvy about the law, so that's probably what he's talking about. Look, the common law is I would take the common law or the ancient Roman law. I would take that any day over today's monstrous mountain of legislation.
Absolutely.
Not only legislation, but also treaties between governments. So let me give an example. There are tens of thousands of treaties between the 200 governments in the world today, and these treaties are considered part of what's called international law, and they're considered to be binding on these states. Now, they can breach them, but there's consequences, just like if you breach a contract in a U.S. state. But these treaties, and so for example, if the U.S. wanted tomorrow to abolish our copyright law, which we won't because of the influence of the Hollywood and the music industry and the pharmaceutical industry in the U.S. But even if we wanted to get out of abolish or reduce our copyright law, it would be a violation of the Berne Convention, which is a treaty we entered into in the 80s. Okay, so we'd be in violation of international law. So you have these webs of treaties and legislation, which are, if you just measured by words, let's say, like you take a treatise by a well-known legal scholar that summarizes the private common law in a given state, and you compare that to the length of the words in federal statutes and federal regulations and the treaties, it's probably like 100 to 1 on the wrong side.
Wow. I've always wondered how does that work when let's just say you sign a treaty and it violates, quote unquote, the Constitution, but the treaty automatically becomes law, correct?
No, it's complicated.
Right.
Every country's legal system is different. In the U.S., we have something. Well, you should look this up too if you're interested. Look up the Bricker Amendment. In the 50s, there was a Senator Bricker who wanted to pass an amendment to the Constitution, which would prevent a treaty from superseding or overriding constitutional provisions, because that's one interpretation of the treaty clause in the Constitution. It implies that the supreme law of the land is federal law and the Constitution and treaties. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, my understanding is the way it works usually is, yes, if the federal government agrees to a treaty, then that is on the same level as constitutional law. So it could theoretically undo the Bill of Rights or whatever. But I think the president can't just sign it. He can sign it, and that means the country is obligated under international law to implement it in what's called municipal law or local law, the U.S. law. But unless the Congress does it, it's still not part of the U.S. law. So basically, let's say Trump signed an agreement with China tomorrow, just saying a presidential agreement, and they call these things presidential agreements, which are not really provided for in the Constitution. He signs an agreement saying America hereby limits the scope of free speech protection under the First Amendment, so that it doesn't include. In other words, it doesn't protect you if you insult a member of the government or a member of China or whatever. I don't know, something crazy. Mm-hmm. That would not be part of U.S. law until Congress enacted it. Okay. But until they did, we'd be in breach of international law. But if they did enact it, my understanding is that would be part of the Constitution, not just federal law, and it would be higher than the First Amendment then. That's why Senator Bricker tried to get this amendment, and it failed by a very small margin. It was part of that movement where you had a lot of Americans saying, get out of the UN, get the U.S. out of the UN. Yep. You know, kind of this John Birch Society mentality, which I agree with, actually. Sure. I agree with the sovereign citizen guys on this.
Right.
Yeah, so there's some dangerous things in the Constitution that, if misused, could lead to – I mean, look, Trump has the power to push the button right now. Under the Constitution, he's the chief of, what do you call it? The commander-in-chief of the military. He could nuke one of our enemies and call it the world destruction right now. That's a consequence of the way the Constitution is arranged. There's lots of things in there like that. I mean, look, people talk about how horrible it is for Trump to criticize the NFL football players for kneeling during the national anthem, as if that's some kind of serious invasion of their rights. But if compare that to, number one, the federal government has the right under law to tax these guys half their income every year. They're already stealing half their income. And we're focusing on the fact that the president's criticizing them for kneeling. I mean, the federal government, my son turns 18 in a few years. He's going to have to go register for the Selective Service. Yep. So be subject to the draft. The government maintains the right to put people in jail or to shoot them on the battlefield if they desert, or to force them into military service, to kill them, basically. When the government has that right, and it's not contested as a constitutional matter. In other words, no one really says that it's unconstitutional for the government to march young men off to fight and die in Vietnam, and to kill people, by the way, and to ruin his soul, maybe, right? Yep. I mean, if the government can do that, I mean, if the power to tax is the power to destroy, the power to destroy is actually the power to destroy. Do you know?
Yeah, no.
And then we complain about, the chilling effect of Trump complaining about some football players kneeling.
Right.
I mean, we have our priorities crazy. This is not the problem. If you can kill someone, you can make them kneel or not kneel or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. That's a really good point. I have 4 boys now that are in military age. That's very Very disturbing. Very disturbing.
It's sobering. It's sad.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really gives you a different hopefully gives you a different outlook on life. Well, if you're a libertarian, it should. What?
Yeah, I don't notice the feminists
Right.
clamoring for equal treatment there. You notice?
No, there's not too many marches on that.
I don't hear I don't see a march in D.C. to subject us to the draft.
No, they might do it anyways, though. I know they've tried. How do you live? How do you recommend libertarians live in this society that we have? I mean, we obviously have our ideas of how society should be, how with private property and how economics should be in this and that, but it's obviously not that way. How do you recommend people to get along in the society and still kind of maintain their ideals?
Well, I think that I don't claim expertise on that matter,
Sure.
although
I'm not saying tell us what to do.
I have my opinions.
Right.
I would say that it's a complicated topic, actually. I would say it's probably impossible in certain societies, right? If you live in North Korea or you're conscripted during World War II. I mean, there are certain things. If you're in a concentration camp in World War II, sometimes civilized life is not possible. Sometimes hope is impossible.
Yeah.
I think we're lucky enough that we live in an open enough and dynamic enough society where you can still live a good life. It's just that the statist apparatus around us imposes another hurdle that we have to overcome. It's just the way it is, but it is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
We have to face mortality and disease and death and scarcity and privation and famine and private crime. That's part of life, and you have to find a way to try to succeed around that. And apparently, it's possible because humanity's existed for tens of thousands of years, and we've gradually improved or progressed. So it's possible. I also would say that the libertarian debates about thickism versus thinnism could inform a little bit how you look at this, because we can't even get into the whole debate, but
Right.
I think that the truth is, whether this is a thinnest or a thickest view, I'm actually not sure, but none of us are just libertarians. Okay, we're libertarians and then other things.
Right.
We have other values in life other than liberty. Doesn't mean they should trump liberty, but it's one of our values, one of our hobbies, one of our activities, one of our avocations, one of our passions, one of our callings. So I think a practical approach has to be what you have to adopt. Ayn Rand has talked about this, and others. More the Greek view, right? Like, listen. More the Rothbardian view that if you want to be a teacher and teaching it, or a doctor, and those fields are completely monopolized, or a firefighter, something like that, they're completely monopolized by the state. You don't have an obligation to be a martyr and refuse to do what your dream and passion is just because you would have to work for the state to do it. So just like driving on the roads. Okay. So I think that we should not have guilt and not be martyrs for the cause. That said, I think that we ought to try hard to fight the natural impulse to defend our, like I'm a patent lawyer, so my livelihood depends upon patent law, and so I have a conflict of interest, let's say.
Sure.
In looking at whether these laws are just, because I'm going to want to find a way to justify them. In fact, that's what I did. I tried for years to try to find a way to justify a patent and copyright law. But, hey, conflicts of interest are part of life too. And I overcame that. I'm against it even though, right?
Yep.
So we have to try to be on the lookout for not being co-opted into the state, because there's a temptation to say, look, I'm a federal district judge now. I'm going to go along and put this guy in jail. But when I get on the Supreme Court, then I can really be libertarian. And that might never happen, right? And by that time, you're probably too corrupted. You can't do it. So that's a practical art of balancing in your life what's right and wrong. And I think that, like, the simple test would be, don't take a job that requires you to do something that you could not do in a free market. Right. I could be a garbage collector or a fireman or a doctor or a teacher in a free market.
Yep.
So if the government's co-opted those fields, I think you can find a way in some cases to do those jobs, but you have to fight against the temptation to be corrupted. But if you're a tax collector or if you're a DEA agent and you're doing things that are inherently evil and wrong, I think you shouldn't do that.
That was kind of the
So
Rothbardian thought, wasn't
yeah,
it? That's kind of
yeah,
where
I
it came
think
from.
Rothbard did say something along those lines.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental line. The problem is you get drawn into defending your field. You know, you get
Right.
drawn into defending public schools if you're a public school teacher. You get drawn into defending state tax hikes to increase the tuition or the teacher pay in a public university if you're a teacher there. So you have to fight that, and that takes some integrity and some principles.
Yeah, it's always disappointing but kind of fun sometimes to read some of the fights of I'm the bigger libertarian anarchist than you are.
And I think all
Get
that's
caught
part
up
of the
into that.
game. I would also say this in life. This is just my view from living 50 years. You want to die having some contentment that you were on the right side of things, and because we're never going to achieve liberty 100% or freedom or utopia, never.
Right.
Even if we achieved it tomorrow, there's still a possibility of an invasion from outer space or civil war or a group of statists rising up or a private criminal. There's always something that could happen because of free will, because people have free will, right? But I think that we should try to be guided by right and wrong, and that is informed heavily by our devotion to the non-aggression principle. So while I do agree with Douglas Rasmussen and Den Oyl, the two kind of neo-Randian philosophers, I think that the non-aggression principle is not a direct ethical guide for human action. It's not a guide for what you and I should do in our daily lives. It's a guide for what laws are justified.
Interesting.
Which means that in some cases you could imagine, we all can imagine that just because what you're doing is rightful, it's not moral. So for example, you can stand on your lawn and yell at your grandmother and refuse to allow your grandmother to visit you for no reason. And so what you're doing is legally rightful, but you're an asshole, right? And you're doing something immoral. And libertarians have no trouble recognizing that thing. But the converse, I think, can also be true, which is that it's possible to violate someone's rights and for that not to be immoral. And all I'm saying is that just because something is a violation of the NAP or someone's rights doesn't necessarily mean that it's a violation of right and wrong. So, for example, if my kid is starving in a snowstorm and I have no choice but to break into this guy's cabin and steal a loaf of bread to save him, it might be immoral for me not to do that. I don't know. I'm not a moral philosopher. All I'm saying is that the fields of moral philosophy or ethics is distinct from political norms, which is what the non-aggression principle, technically speaking, is aimed at. So, for example, you don't view the field of morals or ethics as a subset. I'm sorry, you don't view the field of rights as a subset of morals. They're intersecting sets. Now, I think they're largely overlapping. So what I'm saying is they're almost completely overlapping, so that the NAP can still serve as a moral guide. We just have to be careful not to think that it's always necessarily a moral guide. Sure. But my point is, long-winded point is that as sincere libertarians who have a strong devotion to the NAP, even though it's really aimed at what the law should be instead of our personal action, it should, of course, still largely guide our action. We should never commit aggression against people if we can avoid it. Right. We should try to minimize that. Right. And, that's the challenge. That's the challenge of living as a good man in a mixed world.
It is. And, when you bring up stealing a loaf of bread to save your child, which, technically is might be a violation of the NAP because you stole someone else's property, but I would do it. I would do it in a heartbeat.
Well, and
yes.
And if you weigh the destruction on depending on which choice you make, I mean, is the destruction on your side would be the loss of the boy. The destruction on his side might be a damaged door jamb. So
well, not only that. So this gets back to my thing about the common law. In the common law, when there's a dispute, like let's say that the homeowner sued me for damages. Okay, this is going to be a real situation that actually happened in some city, in some world, and the judge, they can ask questions. They can say, well, what happened? They know what the local customs were. They know whether there was a homeowners association that maybe had a necessity exception. I don't know, but the point is, it's hard to specify all the details that would go into an actual judicial decision about this that was attempting to do justice. When you're attempting to do justice, you have to have a real dispute with real parties. This is, by the way, the reason why the Supreme Court and federal courts don't take advisory questions usually.
Right.
There needs to be the case or controversy, we call it. There needs to be an actual dispute. And the reason is because otherwise we're just answering a hypothetical which might not be fully specified. In fact, they're very rarely fully specified. These libertarian things, like I debated Jan Helfel one time, this kind of idiot minarchist Randian guy who is good. He's good when he attacks the bad guys, but when he talks to a real anarchist, he just kind of says over and over, if you were in the desert and you needed to take my water, would you take my water? And I'm like, well, what I would do is irrelevant to the question of what rights are, right?
Yep.
I mean, I might commit murder in some cases. Yeah, I don't. I mean, what does that have to do with whether it's right or wrong? So anyway,
I had to tell you, I've enjoyed those debates that you've had with him. Pretty good laughs with him, actually. You destroyed him. It was just plain and simple.
I didn't even want to. I kind of liked the guy before, but I knew what he was going to be up to. But anyway, that's just.
I have seen him with other folks with real status, and he does a great job knocking them around, but boy, he made a mistake going against you.
And he had one with Jeff Tucker, and he got to be so annoying with Tucker that Tucker just said, "Look, I gotta go.
I'm out of here." That was great.
But the reason he's annoying is because he's a radical compared to Nancy Pelosi.
Right.
But when he talks to us, he's the statist, and he knows it, and he's on the defensive then.
Right. Yeah. Oh, man. Well, I know I've kept you quite a while. Just wanted to ask you real quick, would you mind taking – because this is a live radio show. Would you mind taking a few calls from people listening? Call-in questions.
Sure.
Okay.
I have maybe I have a few more minutes here. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, folks. We have Mr. Stephan Kinsella on here, and if you have some questions about law or even, copyright or anything, go ahead and call in now. Let's go to the phones. Hello, caller. You're on with Mr. Kinsella.
Hey, good morning, Josh. This is Frank Turney, and I got the courthouse blues. And maybe he'd give his take on jury nullification when it comes to rights and powers when you're sitting in a jury box, whether it's city, state, and federal government. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, Frank. All right, that was our local FIJA man right there, actually.
Okay.
So
cool.
What's your thoughts on jury nullification?
Oh, okay. I actually, I misheard. I didn't quite hear the question. My mind wandered. So he wants to know about jury nullification?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that jury nullification is implicit in the, I guess, the Fifth Amendment and the Bill of Rights, right, where you don't have to incriminate yourself, and also the prohibition against double jeopardy. So, and the guarantee of jury trial, right? So basically, if you have those guarantees, then jury nullification is just a fact. The jury has the power to nullify by refusing to convict, because if a jury refuses to convict a criminal defendant, then he can't be retried because of double jeopardy.
Right.
And he has the right to demand a jury trial. So if you have those two guarantees, which we have in the Constitution, which, by the way, I don't think should apply to the states, but still, they're in most states' constitutions anyway. But
yep.
So jury nullification is a very important check on state power. And I think there is nothing wrong with jurors being told by the defendant's counsel that they have this power. But judges won't let them do it. I think that's completely unconstitutional and a violation of rights. I'm all in favor of it. That's how I get out of jury duty all the time. I raise my hand and I loudly say I'm in favor of jury nullification. I would never, ever, ever, ever vote to convict someone of this drug crime, no matter what, even if it's a day. No. And they let me go. Yeah. And I don't want to be let go, really, but they weed out us guys. They weed us out.
Oh, yeah.
They know how to get rid of us now.
I managed to stay quiet long enough to get on a grand jury once and had a great time.
I bet.
Lots of people
I think that's kind of heroic. Yeah.
They
but
did
I think
not go to court.
Look, I felt like it was risky because I'm a lawyer and have a license and I can't play dumb American. And, know, so I figured like if the judge finds out I've got a paper trail saying I'm for jury nullification and I acted like I wasn't, he might disbar me or put me in jail for contempt. So, there's a state chilling effect on people being brave like that. But yeah, no, I think it's a tragedy that we don't recognize it. I do think it's a common law right and a natural right, or a civil right at least anyway,
Well,
and it's an implication of the constitutional rights we have.
That's interesting because I wanted to ask. I've never quite understood this in the Fifth Amendment or wherever it is. It says at cases at common law, you have the right to a jury. What? Why do they specify
I forgot
that?
the language exactly, but I think the implication is, and the way the Supreme Court is interpreted, is that in the federal system, there's a right to have a jury for any criminal matter and for any civil matter over a certain amount.
$20.
And in the and in the in the state courts, they've applied that through what's called a selective incorporation under the 14th Amendment. They've applied the Bill of Rights to the states, or most of them.
Mm-hmm.
They've said that the states have to provide a jury in a criminal case if the defendant demands it, and they also have. But I don't think they require that in civil cases.
Right.
I think it's a weird. It's not completely symmetrical, but it's because of a selective incorporation of the 14th Amendment and applying that requirement to the states. And there might be some exceptions for very minor things like a misdemeanor or but yeah, basically it's a good right to have. It's good that you can demand a jury.
Sure.
Now I'm against the government's right to conscript people to serve on the jury in the first place, but that's a whole different issue.
Yeah, exactly. They corrupt everything good. Everything
Yeah,
good.
they do. Yeah. I mean, you really wouldn't have trouble getting people to volunteer for jury duty. You don't have to make it mandatory.
Right. Well, I think it makes. I don't know if it makes it easier because the mandatory people usually are people that work for the state. I found when I've been there.
I know. The government's benefited by having it mandatory because it does lower the quality of the jurors, I believe. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yep. All right, we got another caller here. We'll go to hello caller. You're on with Stephan Kinsella.
Hi, this is Randy.
Hi, Randy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had two different things, if I may. Regarding the supremacy of the treaties, I always thought that a treaty could not defy the Constitution. And I know it talks about treaties in Article 6 of the Constitution. And basically it says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and it goes on a little bit. Now, I thought that the key words were under the authority of the United States, so that if, for instance, like your examples, if they're going to make a treaty with China, and one of the provisions in that treaty is that newspapers in this country shall never make a mention of the forbidden city or use the word Beijing or Peking, that's not right. And if you're ever going to refer to it, just refer to it as the holy capital. And that's the law. That's what's in the treaty. I would think that they could not make such a provision in the treaty, or at least it would not be valid, because it's not under the authority of the United States to do so, because it's clearly in violation of the First Amendment. That's my first thing.
I think, and you probably could make that argument. I would think that authority means whether the Senate has ratified it, but you could be right. But I think the problem is there's ambiguity, right? And so that's why you just look up the Bricker Amendment. The Bricker Amendment was an attempt to clarify this because there was a perceived problem. And of course, this is right after the founding of the United Nations, right after World War II, that all this came to a head. So I think there's a danger there because of the uncertainty of what the courts would do. I would, of course, make your argument. I would favor your argument. But I don't think this is like clear, objective, hard and fast law that you can count on being decided that way, especially when it's being decided by the courts of the federal government itself, who have an interest in, unifying with their brothers and supporting their power.
Yeah, one thing I observe about the Constitution, it's almost like prose using supreme economy of words, like, for instance, the example of the Second Amendment. To me, if you examine exactly what the Second Amendment says, it's quite clear to the logical and decent mind, but it's not, pages and pages of, well, if this, then that, and this and that. They don't bother with that. They just go with logic and purity, and that's the beauty of it. But anyway, my second thing, if I may, and you brought this up a little bit about some of the people who talk about you know, that the capitalization of your letters of your name, and if it's in little lowercase, then the government can do this and that, and I consider that kind of ridiculous. And you mentioned about the yellow fringe on the flag and anyway, maybe you can answer this question. My thought and recently people have called up and mentioned things like that, and my question is this: okay, I'll accept that if you capitalize the letters of your name when you write your name, that places you under some category, versus if you lowercase them. Only if somewhere buried in the Federal Register, in all those tons and tons of words and books and things, somewhere there's a tripwire that says that, you know, if you capitalize this, then you must pay double taxation. But if you put it in lowercase, then you don't have to pay double.
Right, but it's magic, Randy.
Yeah, is there such a tripwire in the Federal Register somewhere or in the statutes?
Well, I think that let's suppose one of these guys was finally successful. He goes to court, and for somehow a judge agrees with him and lets him off of his tax liability because the court used the wrong case on the font on the court document. Guess what's going to start happening tomorrow? I mean, they'll just use the other case. I mean, it won't do any good. It might do good in one bizarre case, but this is not the way to fight the state, I believe, because the state actually does have the ability right now to enforce these vast powers against us.
Right. And that's the biggest part of the whole thing. They have all the guns.
By the way, on the supremacy clause, so I mentioned earlier, I feel like I'm even more radical in nullification and federalism than, like, say, my buddy Tom Woods, because I think the supremacy clause does not mean what most people think it means. It does not mean that the federal government is supreme over the states. It does not mean that the Supreme Court is supreme over the other branches or the states. What it means is this is the sort of the final national law, but it doesn't mean that the states aren't the ones who can construe it, interpret it, or enforce it. So just because it's a supreme law, given that the states have the right to secede, they have the right to interpret what the supreme law is and how to go about enforcing it. So I don't think the supreme law, the supremacy clause, is any kind of grant of power at all to the federal government. Necessary and proper clause is, but even that is limited by the power of the states to exit or to secede.
What do you say to people that say that Lincoln's War was the final answer to secession?
Well, if you read Texas v. White, this is the one of the main Supreme Court cases where they kind of dabbled into that a little bit, and they basically went along with the federal government's argument because it was a fait accompli at that point. And they said, look, I think that confuses ethical or normative law with actual law. That's like saying, if someone murders someone, it proves they didn't have a right to not be murdered. Right. Just because you get away with a crime doesn't mean that it wasn't a crime. Just because something bad happens doesn't mean that something bad didn't happen. That's the ultimate positivist mentality, which I totally reject as a libertarian because we're very normative.
Which most people, though, go along with because the state did it. And most
they go along with it because they have been corrupted into thinking that law is what the government tells them on a piece of paper. So you see, this entire legislative thing that we started talking about corrupts everything because it makes people docile and servile to the state. It makes them used to obeying orders and commands of the state. Like, if you tell someone with natural impulses, look, they just stole my neighbor's car because they thought he had marijuana in his back seat because he was an Uber driver and he had, someone left a flake of whatever. And, most people's natural impulse would be, wait, what the hell? That's wrong. The government just stole his car. If nothing else, it was disproportionate. They took a $30,000 car for a very minor crime that hurt no one, like having a flake of marijuana in your back seat. Right. So I'm talking about civil asset forfeiture. Yeah. Most people would have the same intuitions that we do, except that they've been conditioned to accept the government's final word on things. And so they say, yeah, but it is in the law. It is on the law books. That is what it says, and you should have known. Right. You got the right to vote and kick these guys out. If you don't like it here, you can leave it, unless you're in jail, which I guess you can't. But Exactly. So they just repeat all these things that we hear on on television shows and the propaganda of Hollywood and New York and D.C.
Well, our great city of Fairbanks actually last year they raised their budget by I think $300,000 based on what they figured would be future asset forfeitures.
Yeah.
They thought,
Yeah.
we could probably spend more because we'll go out and get more civil asset forfeitures.
Yeah, it's a racket. It's horrible.
Corrupt.
I mean, I'm looking forward to the day when robot cars become the norm,
Right.
because there will be no more accidents or speeding or red light violations, and so the cops will have like almost nothing to do. They'll have no income source. They won't be able to, if the guy from the big city in Houston, which is me, I know it's not the big city to people in San Francisco and New York, but if I drive through Podunk, Louisiana, I'm the big city guy. They're looking to ticket me.
Oh yeah.
They won't be able to anymore.
Well, we have 2 more calls. Do you have time to hit them real quick?
Yeah, let's hit
right.
2 more.
All right. Hello, you're on with Stephan Kinsella. Go ahead, caller.
Wow, what an honor. Doctor, I guess.
No, I don't think he's a doctor. Do you have a doctorate?
No.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He is a lawyer.
That's okay.
I thought, yeah. What can you say about the dialectics of liberty?
Okay. Is that your question?
Well,
Did you say you had 2? Did I misunderstand you? Did you have 2, or is that the question?
Well, okay, I'll go back. Here's the big question. We got to, if we're basing our entire existence on all this fiat, all the fake, all the phony, when's it coming down? I'll ask you that. That's my real question, and I know you're...
All right. Okay.
Right. So
let me take a stab at both.
Those are 2 rough questions. I'll get off here and listen to you, and I appreciate the show, gentlemen. Later on.
All right, thanks. That was our John Galt.
Cool. Very cool. On the dialectics of liberty, that refers to a type of argument people have made in favor of libertarian rights, because there's different types of ways you can argue for rights, and we can't go into this here in a question or even a short period. I've given many, many lectures on this and written on this. Dialectics, what it means is, instead of arguing from natural law per se, like saying this is the way things are and this is the way therefore they should be, and so this is our natural rights and then they arise from that, or instead of arguing like a utilitarian or a modern empiricist and saying that, look, we just want to achieve good consequences, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, so what kind of laws should we have to do that? It's more of a principled approach, but it's rooted in recognizing there are limits to the natural law argument. So basically, it's based upon Hans Hermann Hoppe's argumentation ethics, which I've talked about in many podcasts and many lecture series. And the idea is that you can demonstrate that only the libertarian natural non-aggression principle and related ethical rules, only they can be justified in argumentation or dialectically in discourse with other people, because when you have a peaceful, civilized, sincere conversation with someone, when you're trying to find the truth of a matter, especially the truth about what rules we should put in place in society, what laws should be justified, everyone that's participating in that discussion is already presupposing a certain set of basic norms that you could never argue against.
Right.
So you're presupposing peace and respecting each other's bodies, at least for the purpose of having a discussion. So it wouldn't make any sense to argue with someone, hey, okay, let's sit down, have a nice conversation. Here's a glass of wine. I think I have the right to kill you. I mean, why would I give you the right to sit down and have a conversation with me if I believe that? I would just kill you. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So there are certain norms you could propose that are incompatible with what has to be the baseline of all civilized norms. And I can't go into this here, but the libertarian would say that that is socialism. Any socialist norm, in effect, is incompatible with the pro-property, pro-peace, pro-cooperation norms of engaging in discourse about this in the first place. So you can't get on a tree limb and saw it off and hope not to fall to the ground. Basically, you have to stand on what you're resting on and recognize that that's valid, and that is libertarianism's basic principles. What was the other question?
I think
Something
he asked
about
when with this fiat and everything, and I think part of it's with currency. When do you see it ending, collapsing on itself, or anything like that?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you're talking about fiat law or fiat currency, but
I think both. He's our money guy.
yeah, it's hard for me to predict the future.
Yeah.
My view is the following. I am skeptical. Well, first of all, I think we have a large degree of freedom already.
Yep.
Okay, and I think that in an imagined future society of freedom, we would still not have perfect freedom because there's always the possibility of some crimes or some mishaps or whatever. So it's always a spectrum, and we're pretty good now. We have it better off materially than people in the past. I am skeptical that we can run around like libertarians, being probably 1% of the population or less, and that we can hope that the way we change the world and achieve liberty is to persuade, I don't know, 40%, 50%, 60% of our fellow men to agree with us, to become Rothbardians or whatever, by passing pamphlets out to them at malls or whatever. I think empirically that's probably unlikely to be the way to achieve liberty.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not blaming people for running for office or for pestering their uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. Those things are fine, but I don't think that we can expect that by and large most normal people are going to be interested in philosophy and become raving libertarian lunatics like we are. So I don't think that's the way to achieve liberty. And if that was the only way, I think we would never achieve liberty, because I don't think that's the way human society works. What I do think, though, is that I think that as people become richer and more technologically sophisticated and more free, that we will become more free, and we'll have more, we'll have weapons eventually. I think that, so for example, copyright and patent are horrible, but copyright, we have torrenting and encryption and the internet. People are getting around copyright.
Mm-hmm.
Patent is horrible. It prevents you from making a product you want to make. Guess what? We're going to have 3D printing in a certain amount of time that everyone can just download an encrypted file on the Pirate Bay or something like that that tells you how to make a new smartphone, and you just let your printer in your garage go to work making it. No one can stop you. So I think that technology is going to increase our freedom. And eventually, if we don't kill ourselves with some kind of Islamic nuclear, conflagration or nano weapons or something like that, gray goo, I think that eventually everyone will have their own personal robot swarm armies. And everyone will be basically invulnerable and basically infinitely rich. Now, this is way down the road. Okay, we're talking. But I think that I think that technology and capitalism and wealth and cosmopolitanism, right, and just people getting away from our early atavistic tribal connections is what's going to lead us to freedom. So I'm optimistic, but I'm leery about the next 100 years.
Sure.
But if we make it past that, I think that we may dominate the universe someday as gods.
All right. Well, we have one more. Do you want to take it, or you got to run?
I'll take one more.
All right. Hello, caller. You're on with Stephan Kinsella.
All right. Hey, this is Charles.
Hey, Charles. How are you doing?
I was going to ask about the Hans Hoffa essay, and is argumentation ethics connected with libertarian property ethics or private property ethics? Just a question. And I have a Supreme Court case to bring up between Franklin Roosevelt and Curtis Wright, that 1936.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thanks, man.
All right. Thanks, Charles.
Yeah, I would say these kind of arguments are kind of abstruse and abstract. I don't think they're going to work that well in courts right now. But yes, Hans Hermann Hoppe, his argumentation ethics, defensive rights, clearly is one of the strongest, in my view, ways to support private property rights. So absolutely, he's strong. In fact, Hans Hermann Hoppe founded this group in Turkey called the Property and Freedom Society. So he sees clearly a very, very strong link between freedom or liberty, and property, private property rights. In fact, he's so radical that Hans defines socialism as not just the government control of the means of production, like the factories, but any institutionalized interference with private property rights. I mean, in its extreme form, in its essence. So he would call any government, I mean, theoretically, a criminal who steals your car is a socialist because it's basically a form of not respecting private property rights.
Right.
Now, on an institutionalized setting, that's what socialism really is, and then typically it manifests itself by control of the means of production because that's the main levers of control. But even if the government taxes me and gives it to redistributes my wealth to someone else, that is a type of socialism too. And capitalism would be a system where private property rights are respected. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have voluntary, quote, socialistic, unquote, communities where people, like a family, like there's kind of, in a family, there's a type of communism in a sense, right? Inside the family, or you could have a commune or a kibbutz. But it's all based upon the recognition of private property rights. Within that, people can contractually agree to do whatever they want. You could have, as Rothbard called it, a gorgeous mosaic of different types of human communities, right? You could have artsy places, lefty places, culturally conservative places, all kinds of different human communities. And in fact, I believe that this focus on geography that some people have is a little bit antiquated. The 19th, 20th, 21st century mentality. I mean, Doug Casey has this idea of philes, P-H-Y-L-E-S, which is the idea that we can now, because of the internet and travel and all these things, we can associate with people according to our interest in different ways. We don't even have to live next door to them necessarily. And of course, we're doing this right now, right? You and I you're in Alaska, I'm in Texas, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm wearing shorts right now today. I don't know what you're wearing, but it's nice weather here today.
Well, it was pretty nice for us because it's 2 below and we're expecting 20 below, so we're doing good. But
the caller, let me just say one more thing. The caller, if he's interested in this, you should go to my website, stephankinsella.com, and under my publications page, I have, I think I have an article called A Concise Guide to Argumentation Ethics. So it's got a lot of links in there to more information, talks, and articles and books on this topic if he's interested in pursuing it further.
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why I think that Alaska will be free sooner than Texas, because your random radio show caller is a Hoppian.
You could be right.
All right. Well, Stephan, thank you very much for joining us. It was just fantastic. And again, if folks want to learn more about you, I think stephankinsella.com is probably the best place to go because everything's there. And I also suggest to subscribe to your podcast and everything. And give our best to the man, Hans Hoppe, from Alaska, the next time you get to talk to him.
I'll do so.
All righty, sir. Well, thank you very much. You have a great week, and we'll give you a break and hopefully maybe have you on another time.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. All right, folks. Boom. All right. There we go. Oh, that's what happens when you break the law. Woo, woo, woo. Yeah, I'm glad he came on. The whole thing with laws, it's so fun to talk about because, as he pointed out, this whole thing that we live in is just a big old honking farce. Supposed law and justice and the courts and all that. It's just a bunch of garbage. I mean, it's a great big scam. It's fake. It's Looney Tunes, basically, and they act like it's real, and obviously 99% of the population think it's real also, but it's not.
Yeah, they act like it's real because the pay is real to them.
Yeah.
The money's real.
Exactly.
That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
And everyone
It's
knows
cash
that.
money.
Sad thing is, everyone knows that, yet they go into a jury and they'll find someone guilty because the procedure says that they should.
Right.
Violating their own conscience.
Even though, and you have a judge in there saying, no, just because you have to follow, I decide what the law is.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. What am I doing here? Yeah, the jury thing's pretty interesting because, even back in the day, the Supreme Court was ran by jurors.
And I shouldn't say everyone knows it's bogus, but many of them do.
True, there's a lot of true believers out there.
There are a lot of really stupid people
Yes.
who go in there. So
There are. And they think they're going to justice. But the state uses all these words to combobulate and confuse us because they call it justice. The Justice Department.
yeah.
The justice system. It's like, just us? What do you... No, I don't think so. Nothing just about it at all.
Well, if it was about justice, then they wouldn't be putting people in prison for slashing tires.
Right.
They'd go make them pay for it.
Right. You have to pay. You have to pay the state a fine.
Yeah, pay the state the fine. But I had an attorney tell me once that trials are not about finding the truth. They're about who puts on the best show.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what they're about.
That's why we have so much of the plea bargains now. I mean, you have your supposed court-appointed attorney, and what do? They say, well, just take the plea deal. Just take the plea deal. And they come in there and they badger you and beat you up and say, well, if you take this plea, we're going to knock it down to blah, blah, blah. If you go to court, we're going to find you guilty anyways, and we're going to hammer you.
Yeah, and the judge is really nothing more than a theater director.
Yeah.
He's not there for the purpose of justice. It's to make sure the show goes on the right path.
I like the way that Stephan basically said, they act like they're judges. They wear the costumes that judges used to wear and stuff like that. But
so do actors.
They're not, exactly. They're just acting as a judge. Yeah. Yeah, if you have a script that you have to follow, that's pretty hard to say that you're, for one, unbiased, and two, that you can mete out justice. There is none.
Right, and you're being paid by the show producers.
Yeah. It's interesting when he's talking about contract law, too, because I know I've had contracts before where I had to hire a lawyer to read them. Because they were so extensive. It's like, oh, my gosh. But you have to do it because, oil companies like to throw things in there for their benefit. So it's good to have a lawyer look at it and say, they're going to get you right here. Do you want to sign this? I wouldn't. Okay. What's my counter? And then you counter or whatever. And just like you said, you can't, even though I've signed contracts that were pages and pages and pages and pages, right? And it took this one in particular I'm thinking about, the largest one I've signed paper volume-wise. We got a lawyer, and we went back and forth with each other for months before both sides signed it. Because there was stuff I didn't like, and I was like, no, it has to say this. I want this in there, blah, blah, blah. And then they looked at it like, well, we'll accept some of this. And you just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until you both agree. And even then, just like Stephan mentioned, even then, down the road, it wasn't even a month, and something popped up that wasn't in the contract. Then you're back on the phone, or okay, well, this came up. Now what do we do? There's nothing in the contract saying which way we go here. Start all over again. Amend the contract. So you amend it and push on, which could take months, weeks. Usually those go a little faster because it seems like things that pop up like that are more priority, like, well, this needs to get done.
Right.
All right, well, let's write a little clause where we both agree real quick, and then we'll go back to it and fix it. But yeah, it's fun. Contract is no different than contract law shouldn't be any different than not. I don't want to use the word social contract, but it's kind of the thing where if you hurt someone, steal from someone, should be the same thing. There's a set of this law that says that you can't do that. You shan't do such things. You shan't steal and kill, and everyone agrees with that, unless it's a state, and then everyone says, well, it's okay for them to do it. even though they're just individual actors doing,
Right.
It's so frustrating. How is it okay? So when Trump isn't president, he can't send us off to kill people. They would call that murder, but he is president, so now he can send people off to kill people.
Right.
He can kill people with a drone now, but he has enough money to own his own drones.
Mm-hmm.
If before he was president, he killed someone in Yemen, he would be locked up for murder. They wouldn't say, he couldn't go, well, you guys are doing it. The state would still say, no, you can't do that. You murdered someone. You're going to jail. But I killed a terrorist. You're going to jail. Oh, jeez. Oh, wait, you're president? Oh, you can do it all day long. It's okay now. It's all good. That's the part that boggles my mind that people don't see that.
As president, you can just kill the collateral damage,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all okay.
Well, when you're president, you kill the people that said they would have put you in jail.
Right. It's all for a greater good.
All for the greater good. Someone's good. Definitely not for the good of the folks that got bombed. At least I don't think.
It's not even good for the people who paid for the bomb.
Exactly. It's a pretty warped way to free someone by killing them. Mm-hmm. You're free now. Yay. Wait, what? All right, let's go to the phones. Hello, caller. Thanks for calling.
Just wanting to know, clearly you've got a one-sided liberalistic view on wars. Wars are horrible. Been in them myself. But we do have to fight them to keep the peace that we have here at home. So what are you guys talking about here?
So, like bombing Yemen or the Iraq War?
We're at war right now
Mm-hmm.
with an organization of people who have no concept of what a free life is. And what are you saying? No, don't do anything? Just let them come and take over what they want?
Now, are you talking about ISIS?
Oh, that's a good start, sure.
Okay, well, ISIS was armed, funded, and trained by the U.S. Did you know that? Just blow it off like it doesn't exist.
Well,
you don't like that fact, so blow it off, right?
Well, what are you going to do? You going to blow it off, or are you going to fight?
Why are we over the? I mean,
the reason.
Why did we attack Iraq?
Oh my God, guy! Why did we attack the Indians?
You think murdering all the Indians was good?
It's to take the property.
So mankind is basically a pretty tough thing to beat, and all of the wars that we have fought in the past were all wrong, and therefore we should stop. Great pipe dream, but hell, guys, you stop fighting ISIS, what do you got? You got tyranny in the streets.
I disagree with that, actually. I mean, ISIS was created because we went into the Middle East in the first place. I mean, there was no reason to attack Iraq.
You attack people, and for their entire lives, until they're 15 years old or older, the only thing they've seen are their families and their friends being destroyed and dismembered. They come home to a house that used to be their home, and they see the body parts of their former family members. That desensitizes a person, and that produces the so-called terrorists. Then they're very easy to recruit into CIA organizations. That is exactly how it.
That's right. I feel bad for those poor terrorists. They only wanted to kill my wife and my kids.
Really? They never wanted to. Who did they want to kill?
But most
how
of them,
did they ever want to kill?
But most of them we have killed. The Americans have killed. Why did we attack Iraq?
So what's your resolution?
Why did we attack Iraq?
Oil. Pure, plain and simple. Oil.
All right.
Okay.
That was okay to do?
The United States needed the oil to continue the lifestyle that you love.
No, we don't.
Cars that you drive.
You heard of the North Slope?
It all comes down to oil, my friend. We needed the oil just like every other nation needs the oil. They weren't being fair about it. They were a radical bunch of people.
What do you mean they weren't being fair about it?
Did we necessarily make the right decisions in every war we've ever played? No, of course not. But now that you're in this, you want to do what?
Come home.
Poor boys because, they could kill my wife and kids and stone somebody to death in the street because of a barbaric lifestyle.
But we're murdering them. We're murdering them, okay? We kill hundreds and hundreds of people that have nothing to do with terrorism every day.
And they're not killing people all over the world every day?
Not compared to what we're killing.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Really?
really.
Huh. I'll be a son of a gun. I thought we was losing people all over the world by the hundreds. I mean, how many women? Would they take a whole bunch of girls out of school here somewhere overseas a few years ago just because they wanted women?
Boko Haram. Yeah, I remember that.
But those are nice guys, aren't they?
Why did we attack Iraq? Why are we still in
nice
Afghanistan?
guys.
Why are we bombing Yemen? I mean, the Boko Haram issue, then let them take care of that.
So your resolution
Let them take care of Boko Haram.
Your resolution to war is let go and be love and peaceful, and everybody
Don't
will
start
be
them.
peaceful back.
I'm all for protecting America, but I'm not for going over and starting wars that make no sense at all.
Well, we said that about Vietnam. We said that about.
Why'd we go to Vietnam?
We said that about World War I.
Should we have been in Vietnam?
We said that.
World War I.
Should we have been in Vietnam?
Yeah.
What business does the United States have to be in Vietnam?
Well, for two reasons. One, we had a contract with those people long before the war escalated to the point it escalated. We'd made a contract with those people that we would protect them and stand by them.
We faked.
When they became invaded, we had no choice but to go in and do what we had contracted
We
and
faked.
made an agreement with those people to protect and care for
The
them.
United States faked the Gulf of Tonkin incident to be able to go into the war. If they had a contractual issue to do it, then I don't know why they had to create the Gulf of Tonkin.
So we did that all on our own because we wanted to go in and fight a war.
Yes.
Really? And why did we want to do that?
Military makes a lot of money off of it. Companies make a lot of money off of it.
Oh, so we did this just so that we could make money in a war project.
I don't know. Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex. So did John F. Kennedy. Talked about the same thing. Warning the American people about the military-industrial complex who run the government and start wars. Why did we bomb Libya? He was our guy. He quit.
Why did
He
Japan
quit doing
bomb
this
us?
and that.
Why did Japan bomb us in World War II?
I don't know. I'm not worried about what Japan did in World War II. I'm talking about right
Oh,
now.
I see.
Right now.
Everybody else-
Why are we in Iraq? Why are we in Afghanistan? Why are we in Kuwait? Why are we in Yemen? Why are we in Libya? Why are we in
Because
Syria?
These
Why are we in
people
Syria?
because they have a radical idea of what the life should be, and they want that life, and they will kill you to get it. You don't want.
They can have that life over
there.
there quite easily without us. I mean, I'm not too worried about a guy jumping on his goat and crossing the Pacific Ocean. They can't. They can barely feed their families. They don't have nuclear weapons. They don't have F-15s, F-18s, F-16s. They run around with AK-47. Let them take care of themselves. Saddam Hussein had it taken care of just fine. They didn't have ISIS or
And you don't have a
Al
problem
Qaeda.
with. You don't have a problem with the culture that stones women to death because they didn't get 5 people to witness the rape.
It's not my business what they. So you're okay with going over and killing 1 million of them because they stoned a woman?
No, but I don't want them here with that culture.
I don't want them here with that culture either.
Then
But I
what
don't
are
see
you gonna do?
I don't see a great
any.
big. I don't see a big invasion coming in. How can they even get here? What are they going to do? Jump on their destroyers? They don't have destroyers. They don't have
now-
ships.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. We've had people bombing us in our own country. And that doesn't mean anything to you?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
that
means
was
something.
okay.
Well, think about
That
what.
was okay because those poor people.
How about okay?
They took
Let's take it for
3,000
what they
of us
said.
out.
Osama bin Laden. Okay, he bombed. Let's just say that he bombed the Twin Towers. Right? He was responsible for that. Sure, go get him. Why did he say he did that? Because you've been over here killing us for years and years and years.
No, they're not. They're not battling us for any other reason.
But
than
because
they
we're
have a
free?
they have a culturalistic idea of how life should be on Earth.
Why weren't they any problem for us for hundreds of years?
They have always been problems. Look back in the culture. They got 2,000 years of fighting amongst themselves and killing.
So does the
Because
British.
their
So do the
culture is that
British
way.
and the Romans. They have 2,000 years of fighting each other. World War II. So the Germans. We should go take them out too. They started 2 world wars.
There you go.
All right.
Listen,
Thanks.
it's always somebody else's. It's always our fault, is what you're saying.
No,
Well, hell,
I'm
it's
not
not
saying it's
always
always
our
our fault, but we
Well, you-
have our
you're
reaction
not.
to things.
You're condemning the United States' every action so far. You have condemned every single militarily action that has been taken by the United States. You've condemned every one of them.
Okay.
Well, so what are we?
It's a fact. If it's a fact. If the United States hadn't gotten into World War I, it would have ended 2 years earlier.
Oh my gosh.
Well,
That's a fact.
It is. In fact, yeah.
You can rewrite history any way you want to rewrite history,
No.
my friend.
No,
It
luckily
doesn't
the
involve
winners
fact
get
that
to
we
write
have
the
people-
history.
We have people in this world that would take your freedoms away in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's called the United States government.
They do
Well,
it
why
every
don't you
day.
go- I'll tell you what, my friend, if you dislike this form of lifestyle so badly, if you're so poorly treated, why don't you move to some place that you got better comfort?
That's always
The
the
classic argument. If you don't like my tyranny, go somewhere else.
Well, no,
No, I want it even better. I want it
being
even.
honest.
I want it even better.
You're saying
It needs
that
to be
the
even
United
better.
States- You're saying that we are so messed up and we're just a horrible, horrible people.
Look, America's
yet
an
you've
empire
got
just like any
got
other
one
empire.
You're sitting
It's
in
an
a
empire
Walmart.
like the British.
Look at what you have.
No, I
You're-
appreciate it.
You're
I don't.
condemning what you have.
I don't
Why?
give the government any. Why should the federal government get the credit for what I have? What has it done? It taxes me. It takes from me. It doesn't provide my freedom. My freedom's God-given. The federal
Well,
government
you've got
has nothing to
beautiful
do with
pipe
it.
dream, my friend,
But the federal government's the reason that we're all free and we're all here. So you love all the laws that they pass. You love their taxes. You love
I'm
Patriot
not saying
Act and all.
everything-
Well,
I'm not saying everything is perfect, but I'm sure as hell not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is still.
I'm
a
trying to
very
just get rid
good-
of the. We
this is
have a
still
lot
good
of
nation.
we have a lot of freedoms here. Absolutely, we have good people here. Absolutely, despite the government, we still have a lot of good people here.
You know, yes, our government has problems, no
Big.
doubt, no doubt. But I'm not going to condemn the government and castrize the entire population of the United States
I'm not either.
because
Why
I
did we do that?
disagree with a few politics and political decisions that are going on.
I'm not
That's my
chastising the
job
American
to get in
people.
and try to salvage and save and protect and make better.
I'm not castigating the American people.
Well, you are.
I'm saying that the American government, the United States government, doesn't have the right to go into these wars that they do. In fact, even constitutionally, they're not because they don't have any congressional authority to be in these wars. Why don't they vote on those? Why don't they do their constitutional duty and Congress
I'll tell
vote
you
on
what,
whether we should
man.
be at war?
I'll tell you what. You get into
Do you
a
believe in the
position
rule of law?
and you call all of our troops back from all over the world that are doing what they're doing,
Mhm.
and you bring them home, and you leave everybody else alone and answer what's going to happen to our world, what's going to happen to the United States. Do you think they're going to pat us on the back and say, "Oh, thank you, we're going to leave you alone"?
Do you think they're going to
We're not
automatically
gonna
come and
help you.
attack us? How could they attack us if the greatest military in the world is right here in America protecting itself?
What was the bombing on the Boston Run a few years ago? What was the Twin Towers? You don't think they can reach you? You're an idiot.
You think they can't now just because we're over there? And you don't think we have more people that hate us now because we're over there? Think they like
No.
us now?
I mean, good grief. The guy that
You're at
the
war,
guy
my
that's
friend.
So you're
You
for
are
the
at war.
genocide of all the brown people in the Middle East?
You are at war.
the guy.
You don't like
war
it.
of choice.
I don't like it, but you don't have a whole lot of choice because if you back off and leave them alone, they're not going to go home and be peaceful. That's not their MO. It's not. Never has been their style.
You know, one of the companies that got the contracts to rebuild in Iraq after the Twin Towers, the Bin Laden family. Doesn't that bother you a little? The guy you claim controls these events is the member of the family that gets the contracts to rebuild. You don't see the irony in that?
Oh,
You don't think you're maybe being duped a little bit?
Do
You
I
just
think-
take what's told to you and believe
know,
everything?
I look at this as a large piece of pie. I've got a nice large piece of pie. Now there's a part of that pie that's got some rot in it, but I'm not going to throw the whole pie out. I'm going to go to work on that rot piece and I'll cut it out. You're telling me what I'm getting from y'all is the whole damn thing is rotten. Throw it all away.
The rotten piece of pie is part of it is our foreign policy. It sucks. And
I'm
so
not
does
gonna-
the federal government sucks too. They don't follow the Constitution. They don't follow any of their own laws. I mean, I just said they don't even follow the war
what-
the war
so
acts.
what's
They
your
don't even
resolution?
follow.
So you can complain, but what's your resolution?
Oh, I want to get rid of them all. Get rid of the whole kit and caboodle, but that
And do
hasn't been
what?
happening very, very
And
so
do what?
quick. Why do we need them?
And do well you You got roads you're driving on, son. You got gas you're putting in your car.
I've never seen
private
any. I don't
companies.
see any state people making the
All of
roads. I
these
see
private
private
companies.
people
The
build
United
them.
States is
I build
bargaining
roads.
and
That's right.
bartering with other nations so we can get what we need for our population.
First of all, as Josh pointed out, private companies build the roads, not the state. The state
Private
takes the
companies are the
monopoly.
ones. Private companies are the ones that bring in the goods.
Right. The market is what gives you what you
Oh, really?
have, not the
So
state.
all-
The state takes
all
it.
of this road construction we get up here in Alaska is all private. None of that's funded by the federal government.
I didn't say it wasn't funded.
Well, you just did.
No.
I said the
Well,
private companies
contractors.
build it. Private contractors build it. You
And-
said,
and-
how would we have them? They
And
build
where do
it.
they get the payment?
Why couldn't?
And where do they get payment?
Where
to
did the
do
federal
this road
government?
work?
Where did the federal
Some of that
government?
payment comes from federal money.
Where did the
that
federal government get the
gives
money?
back.
Where did the federal government get it to give it back?
See,
They took it from us
That's
in the
how
first
it works,
place.
my friend. That's how all civilizations have always worked. Go
No,
back to the
it's not
Indians.
how all
Right.
civilizations have always worked.
no,
The Indians hunted and got buffalo. They didn't bring it back and just feed it to their own family that got the buffalo. They shared the family with everybody in the village.
So
We give our
taxation
money
is
to the
sharing.
federal government. The federal government's supposed to give it back and share with us. Are they doing it perfectly? Of course not. Are there things we can fix? Of course there are. But I'm not going to condemn my country and throw the whole damn thing
I'm
away.
not condemning the country. I
Well,
see
you
a big
are.
difference between the country and the government. You see them as one and the same. I don't.
Well, they are part of it. It is one and the same.
No,
They
it's
are
not.
us.
No.
no.
Now, you want to clean them out? Does that mean I have to put up with who you want in there?
I don't want anyone in there.
So who's going to run the government?
I don't want a government. I don't want them in the government.
Well,
Why do I
how
want
do
the
you-
government anyways?
How are you going to keep other nations
Keep it
from coming in
localized.
and taking over what you have?
We have the most well-armed population in the world.
and you
They're not
think
going to
that-
come in here and take us over.
Plus, you
Oh,
got
you
two
don't think
giant
so?
oceans to get across,
No, I
You
don't.
don't think
and they
so?
don't have the ability to do it.
I
even.
don't.
Well,
So I'm curious.
go
yeah,
back and
I-
talk
I-
to one
keep-
of those
I am
families
curious.
at 9/11 and tell them the same thing you just told me, my friend. Go ask them if
So you think all of them are all for our foreign policy, and they're all for the Middle East wars. They don't mind us bombing Yemen, which I don't know what's going on. Why are we bombing Yemen? We're starving people there.
Well, they just announced U.S. is going to stay in Syria now.
Now we're in Syria.
Stay there permanently.
And oil, we don't need the oil. We have the North Slope. Start drilling that baby.
Well, why not
Oh,
just
come
buy the
on.
oil from them?
we don't have
Yeah,
enough
they
oil to
they
run
do
our nation.
sell. They do sell oil.
They do
it's in
sell
their best.
oil, yeah.
It's in their best interest to sell oil. Iraq, we embargoed Iraq so they couldn't sell their oil. Same thing we do with Iran. We've
Right.
embargoed them so they can't sell their oil.
That's right, because we're trying to stop them from taking over the rest of the world. They've got.
When did Iran ever try to take over the rest of the world? They haven't attacked anyone since before the U.S.
Became a
existed. So,
Also, these little mountains and stuff, they don't mean anything. If we open our borders up and we just become peaceful and we tell all of our government to go away, we send all of our troops home to their beds, nobody's going to bother us.
I didn't say we had to open up our borders to everyone.
Well, so how are you going to keep your borders closed if you have no federal government or military?
I don't know. I've seen the. We have that
I
now.
don't know.
We have a federal government now, and supposedly we have 20 million illegals. So, how's that working?
And what would we have if we had nothing?
I guess 50 million.
There you go.
Okay. Thanks for the call. We
oh
will
my gosh.
agree to disagree. Hello, caller, you're up next.
Hi, you guys.
Thanks
I
for
don't want to get into that fray with that tug of words. Don't misunderstand me. I appreciate what you guys are saying. I appreciate the caller's sincerity, but I believe that he just really isn't seeing a larger picture. And had I been able to hear the entire program this morning, I wished I would have not missed the first hour and a half, but I had
It
other
was
things to do.
fantastic. Oh my gosh, it was good.
My loss. But what I wanted to ask Stephan was, we understand what the man that just was calling about. He's concerned about how do you defend, how do you live the life of fear. In other words, basically, the premise he operates from is all about fear.
Mm-hmm.
And is there not another way? And I'm not trying to belittle this man. It's the common accepted
Yep.
worldview that this is how things should be.
Yep.
It isn't make it real. It's just that this is what most people have been convinced of, powers that be, which I'm going to point out to this last caller, we don't have a government. That's our problem. Our problem is that we need a government of the people doing what's right, but we don't have that. We have a bureaucracy.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that said, what I wanted to talk about, and what I would have asked Stephan is, we base a lot of the things that we believe in, we base them on the concept, which is right, because God ordained private property. My question is, let's say that we all understand this is what is normative in all of what is a God-granted right, you know, an inalienable right that God gave us to own, to have things. And again, I point out to many times I have, you couldn't violate thou shalt not steal, or you couldn't violate thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house and or thy neighbor's, you know, wife, or anything thy neighbor has. You couldn't break two of the commandments if there was no ownership and no private property. Now, my question to Stephan would have been, is there such a thing as properties not yet claimed? In other words, let's call them non-private properties. Why on earth, when you have an entire universe, they estimate there's, in terms of numbers of stars out there, not counting planets, they estimate it's 70 times 10 to the 23rd power so far that they've documented.
That they can
That's
see.
how many stars they say are out there that they've actually cataloged. Now, the question that I have about all of this is, if there is property out there that you or I haven't bought and paid for, claimed, staked, whatever way that it became, quote, private property that's legitimate, who owns it? Why don't we focus the whole lenses right on that property and say, may it pay for everything we need so that we can extract out of that property what will pay for the things that won't eat your homestead up or mine?
Well,
that's my question.
I think with future technology, that will happen. Absolutely, it's going to happen. I mean, they know that some of these asteroids and stuff to go zinging by are rich in minerals and you know, gold and different metals that we would love to have. They're made. Some of them are made entirely out of precious minerals or whatever. Right now, I don't think technology. The only thing stopping us is technology is not allowing it. And I'd have to blame the government, because I think if it wasn't the state, then we'd have the technology probably to do all that by now. Because we're restricted in everything. We can't build a rocket, so we're restricted. But let's take it right here. We do have a bunch of unowned land. The federal government claims it owns millions of acres here in Alaska. And I don't think. I mean, government land is unowned land. No one owns it, because all of us can't own it. So I do think that land can be claimed by an individual in the Lockean private property sort of way, where you can go out and claim a homestead and it's yours. We have lots of resources and land right here. We don't even need to go anywhere because we haven't unlocked what's here.
Right on. And what I'm suggesting is that if one has their homestead already, and there are such lands out there, and I don't care if I'm a small business or a mega corporation, I don't care. It's like, if I want to go help myself to additional resources, what's wrong with paying a royalty to fix a road out of that? 10%. Why do I care? You know, it's like, it doesn't matter to me personally if I give a tithe of that resource extraction of what I don't need it. It's not my homestead. But if I'm going to go use it, why do I care if I pay 10% for the good of everybody in the community? That doesn't bother me.
Well, think about on the north end of town, there's that where Walmart is, and Lowe's and Home Depot, all those big companies right there, those big shops.
Yep.
I cannot imagine that if there was not a state building roads, which would mean they wouldn't be paying these property taxes, they wouldn't be paying these income taxes, corporate taxes, whatever. They would build roads. It would be in their best interest to build some nice frickin' roads for us to go driving in, make it as easy as possible for us to go there to buy their goods.
Yeah, and
they would spend the millions. And plus, without if you didn't have to build a road up to the whatever crap that the borough demands in the state and whatever, it wouldn't cost $1 million a mile like it does now.
Right.
$1 million a mile, get out! Oh my gosh, I can't even stand that. It wouldn't cost that much, and they would build the roads, and we'd be glad to drive on these nice roads, and we wouldn't feel bad about it, and we would have someone we could go to that would actually listen to us, say, hey, you know, your road's crap. It's got a bunch of potholes in it. Boom, they'd be on it and fix it. Now most people think, oh, that's utopia, blah blah, but we do that now every day.
Right.
They've already built a gigantic parking lot because they want people to be comfortable to park there. They don't. It's not mud because they want us to go there and consume their goods. That's how the market works, and it would work all over the place. And then some places may not have a nice road because they don't need it. Yep. It's not economically viable to have a road there. I mean, here we do. So why is the state government bankrupt? Because they build roads where we don't need them. Why is the federal government $22 trillion in debt and counting every single day? Because they build stuff we don't need. Right. Because they cannot manufacture the economy. As much as they try to be central economy, you know, as much as they try to be like Stalin, well, I guess they are like Stalin because they're getting the same result. They're bankrupt.
Yeah, and if you go back to Nevada history,
they're bankrupt.
The first decent roads in Nevada were built by private people. There's a good article in the Nevada Historical Quarterly that talks about that, and they went from roads that would destroy wagons to just smooth roads you could probably drive a car down on today. You know, if it existed today.
The Hall Road.
It
was built by corporations.
Right. The best roads are privately built roads.
Guys,
they always have been.
Here's I guess what I'm saying is that I agree with your point in that the decentralization of power and wealth is the way to go, and we should be doing it at the local level, what needs done. And that's where, you know, I agree 100% that this would be how things would develop. One of the things that was one of the last callers asked Stephan a question. It might have been the second to the last person, kind of when I was picking up on the program today, and he wanted to know what does it look like coming down the road, and this kind of is in light of also the last caller, and I would give you a different answer than Stephan gave for this reason. I look at what has happened, and what has happened is the antisocial, like warfare that has occurred against not only just a community or a family, it's down to the level of the individual person. And what's coming in the future, and I see this wholeheartedly, and with this last little news they had from this week about this new religion that some CEO of whatever, Facebook or I forget what, that he's starting, whatever it was, he's starting a new religion based on technology, and he's, you know, basically called for this religion to create a new God, and one that we can install. In other words, one that we decide who it's going to be, who that God's going to be, as if this, I predicted this over 20 years ago, that the image of the beast would be a computer-related, entity, and it is going to be based on artificial intelligence. It's all happening now, and this is why the man that just called on the phone doesn't understand where this ship is heading. What's happening is the whole place is becoming depersonalized to the point where every individual right that we have, we'll soon not just be staring as we walk at our cell phone, we'll have a chip implanted in us telling us where we're going and what we're doing. I don't know why people don't see the Bible is exactly the truth. It's just what's predicted to happen, that you won't buy, sell, trade, do anything unless you take this chip and or this mark of the beast, and it's about people need to wise up here about how fast this freedom, that the little vestiges of freedom we have left, this kind of echo or shadow of freedom that was once, is evaporating exceedingly fast. We have war levied on us in 50 different directions all at once. But it's not what the man thought, that going into the desert is going to stop any of it. He doesn't get it, that it's those who have usurped government for bureaucracy. They're the ones doing this to all of us.
And doing a good job at it, too.
Yeah. So,
well, I'm not too worried about him making a new god. I remember a story of something about a golden calf. That didn't work out too good either.
Yeah, exactly.
Right on, brother. Well, I'm going to let you go because we've got other guys, or other folks, I should say, calling
Thanks, you guys.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it. We'll call her up next.
Good morning. It's Cecily.
Good morning, Cecily.
The guy was the reason why that they were going to war is because we didn't want to pay those people for the goods that they were selling, and so it was all about ripping them off and bombing them. And 9/11 was an inside job. I knew about it before it happened. It had nothing to do with the people over in other countries. It's all just a matter of these people playing their God games of who should live and who should die.
Well, we need the oil.
And who should? Yeah. Well, the thing is that was just about the deadbeats that don't want to pay for the goods that are offered.
Right,
and
they just stole it.
About stealing from everybody, and guess what? You're all a bunch of slaves and being duped into murder and thieving. And I hope that I noticed that whenever any war happens, that the carpetbaggers back home steal everything that you're going out to fight for. So when you get back, maybe you can wrest all of the properties that have been stolen while you were gone, and try to comfort your wife that was raped while you were gone, and so just come back home and protect your families, because the enemy is not out there. The enemy is the U.S. government. So hopefully, I don't know, I'll probably be dead before I see any justice. And the federal government, their label, it says the criminal justice system. So it's an exact truth of what they are, a criminal justice system. Anyway, thank you very much for the show. You're doing great, and I hope everybody stays warm.
All right. Thank you, Cecily. You know, it's kind of funny that people think it's okay to kill someone because they have something we want.
Well, I found that in the call.
They have oil. We need it.
Yeah, I found that in the call. It was that Machiavellian, the ends justifies the means argument. And at the same time, there was the argument that I'm afraid, therefore we can't do anything different.
I'm scared, so let's just kill people.
I'm scared. We need to go bomb everyone.
We have the biggest military in the world by 10 times. 10 times.
Right.
By 10 times. By 10 times, we have the biggest military in the world, and we're supposed to be scared of a bunch of guys with AK-47s and machetes.
Right. And plus the two gigantic oceans. You're not going to get invaded.
Well,
there is no other country in the world that actually has the capability of moving people here to do an invasion.
And it's funny that we are the most well-armed people in the world, right? Americans are. But we can't protect ourselves from a bunch of brown guys with AK-47s. If they're such a threat, you know, they're a big threat because there's 20,000 guys, supposedly, 10,000 ISIS people with AK-47s. That's a threat to 300 million people across a huge ocean in the most well-armed society in the world that the world has ever seen.
Right.
We're supposed to be afraid of them because they're scary, but Americans with guns aren't.
Right.
And these are the these are the same guys. A lot of them, I know, because I read their blogs sometimes. I don't anymore because it's such a waste of time. These are the same guys that carry, they have ARs and they believe in the Second Amendment and everything, and they think that in their mind, someday, they're going to take over the federal government. They're going to defeat the U.S. military in a civil war, right? But we have to have. So you're going to take on the world's largest enemy or army by 10 times with your militias in a civil war, but you can't take on 10,000 people with AK-47s that can't cross an ocean.
Right. Well, and those two big oceans are the reason why the U.S.
Why we're safe.
It's also the reason why the U.S. needs 700 and some bases overseas, because the U.S. can't even conduct an invasion across those oceans without having those 700 bases in place already.
Exactly.
And staffed.
And we're 10 times bigger than the next one.
Right.
And we still can't get it done without having it there. So there aren't any, I don't know, are there any Chinese, Russian, or are there any ISIS bases in Mexico?
Supposedly.
Oh, that's true. Why am I even asking that? Someone's going to call it. Of course there is. Argentina has, or Venezuela has tons of them. That's why we got to nuke them too, because we need their oil. But, I mean, you see how ironic it is? We're scared of them because there are a few guys with guns.
Well, yeah.
But why we have more guns than they do, just the citizens. So why are we scared of them? If they're so bad to the bone, they're going to kill everyone. Why wouldn't we be?
Right, and the ones, the other irony I find is that the people who are the big or the tough military supporters, they're the ones who are the most scared of some foreign invasion that's never going to happen.
Never going to happen. You know, and even like Ron Paul said, let's just bring them back and just have the Navy. Just have a Navy. So that's all you need.
Right.
And that's all you need. You need 2 Trident submarines. I mean, I'm just going way out of the road here. So let's just say we need 2 Trident submarines with 32 ballistic missiles. How many more of those do you need? Nuclear ballistic missiles. Okay, you don't need any more than 32 to take out the whole world.
Yeah.
Okay? Then you have aircraft carrier, like the 7th Fleet in the Pacific, and put the 5th Fleet in the Atlantic. That's all you need.
Right.
That's it. That's all you need.
Right.
They would who could attack us?
Well, I should correct myself.
Who could invade us?
There is one possibility, perhaps, that could lead to an invasion of the United States, and that is if the United States so alienates itself
from the world
and so breaks itself economically through its military activities that other countries are able to just come in and influence the population. Or just infiltrate.
Well,
that's the only. But landing ships on the shore, full of soldiers,
full of Marines.
That's going to take that would take China 50 years to build up.
And they would have a long ocean to get across before they got here.
But let's say that happened. The China. We already know for a fact that the financial capital of the world is moving to China.
Let's go back to your other point though. So aren't we actually saying that we would make America more safe by not alienating ourselves from the rest of the world and not being bankrupt from our foreign policy adventures?
Well, gee, if you didn't go kick your neighbor's door down and shoot his daughter, then maybe he wouldn't be wanting to harm you.
And none of that Middle East stuff takes into account how Britain those were all British colonies at one point or another. I mean, even Vietnam, French colony. Those things have to be accounted for. Yeah. You can't just act like that didn't happen, because those things did happen. French colony. And you know what? South Vietnamese did not like the French either at all. They were an occupying force.
Right, and that goes back.
There was no Iraq until Britain went in there and created the state of Iraq.
And that goes back hundreds of years. Southeast Asia didn't have borders. The borders came into existence because countries like France and England and and the Dutch and all of them would go over to that area of the world, and they wanted the resources, so they would draw up the borders and then subject the population to those artificial borders. And all of a sudden, some guy on one side of the river lives in a different country than his neighbor on the other side of the river. And
then they get nationalistic, where they used to be neighbors. Now I'm a Yemenis and you're actually it would be a Kuwaiti and you're an Iraqi.
Right.
It's just unbelievable. Yeah. Have they had a lot of wars over there? Sure. And we've been involved in most of them lately.
Right.
And we're the reason for most of them. It's just a fact.
Well, yeah, it's a fact that that's what empires do. And this empire's on its way out. Going back to what I was saying, the financial capital of the world we know is moving to China. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, it'll be in China.
So should we be friends with them or enemies?
Well, I think perhaps we should be friends and cooperate with them. But let's say that, they are going to be the financial capital of the world. They are building their military, and perhaps at some point in time they will have a larger military. As far as hardware goes, than we do.
No, Mike, that means we got to build more.
Well, except we're no longer the financial capital of the world, therefore we can't. And so we may be subject to the desires of the Chinese.
You're just convincing
just as the rest of the world is subject to the desires of the United States. I'm wondering, that caller who called in earlier on, how will he feel when the Chinese do to us what we do to the Iraqis?
Well, if they need the oil.
Would he say it's
They need the
justified?
natural gas, Mike.
They do need the natural gas, and that's why...
You're just making a case to do a preemptive strike against China right now. That's all I'm hearing. Preemptive strike. We got to nuke China.
Or am I making the preemptive case for China to conduct a strike here to take the resources that we have? Because
they
China
need
needs them. China just made that deal. Well, it wasn't really a deal. It was like a tentative agreement to look at buying gas,
Right.
To buy gas from Alaska at more than market prices, because China is in such dire need of gas for their ongoing development. They can't find enough.
Right.
So
yeah, they're willing to pay $8
right.
instead of $2.50 or whatever.
Right, and 75% of Alaska's gas would go
Let's sell that baby.
Yeah.
Let's build a pipeline and sell them as much as they freaking want.
So let's say that they decided
I'll
they
put a
did,
sticker on the pipeline that says "Going to China."
Well, maybe China doesn't want to pay those above market prices. Maybe they just like to send some hardware over here and take
bomb
the
us.
resources.
Well,
But they're justified because they need it.
They need it. They want to live
That's
a good life.
That's the logic that I just heard from the caller
They
earlier.
want to live a good lifestyle too, Mike.
I know.
You can't. I mean, what? You don't like Chinese?
I
like Chinese
love
food?
Chinese.
Well, what's your problem? They deserve to live a good life. Now we got a full board of calls. We got 7 minutes. Hello, caller. Thanks for holding.
Hi, this is Randy in another hour.
Yep. Hi, Randy. In another hour. Is that your last name or your? Oh,
First
go ahead.
Hour, Mr. Hour, yeah. Well, I was going to call about something, but since you brought up China and the gas line and Sinopec and such, or you
Sure.
starting to talk about that, that would be nice if we could finally get a gas line. I kind of would prefer if an American free enterprise company was in partnership with us to build that gas line, and we almost made it with Frank Murkowski, but then Sarah Palin destroyed that deal, and then it seemed to get a little bit more hope with the deal with Sean Parnell, governor, but then when
Walker
got in there, he's kind of adversarial to the oil companies and says, no, we want this amount of share in it, and even though we're kind of in dire financial straits a little bit. But anyway, so that kind of went down the tubes again. And now Sinopec then has this understanding with the Chinese company Sinopec, which is a government-owned socialist company. But being socialist and a government company, Sinopec, government-owned, it might be more amenable to all sides of the political spectrum here in Alaska, because the left-wingers, they hate American oil companies and big free enterprise companies like that, like Walmart and such. But a socialist, government-owned Chinese company might be more appealing to them, and so maybe the deal will go through. Now, one little worry I have, and this is kind of silly maybe and just wild speculation, but if China builds and owns a huge gas line through the center of dividing Alaska from east to west and so forth, and then if there's trouble between the United States and China and Russia and such that we have to cut off the gas or whatever because trouble in the oceans and so forth, they might have the moral pretext and the righteous pretext to come in and land in forces to safeguard their pipeline and to keep the gas flowing, perhaps in an allied relationship with Russia, who on the other hand feels that it got gypped when they sold Alaska to the United States, and they might just come in and take Alaska based on the moral pretext that they have that big gas line that they've got to protect. And also in the case of disruption in the sea lanes, there might be an interruption in supplies getting here, and so Russia may bring in a huge contingent of troops for humanitarian reasons to bring in supplies and baby formula for us, just like they did with Kiev, And
Crimea,
so I worry about that.
I don't, just because the logistics, I mean, it's just like we were talking about logistically. It's such a feat to cross the ocean. Even if you have the ships, it's such a feat to cross it safely, especially if you're in a war scenario. It's impossible. It's why America is so safe as it is anyways, because we have these gigantic oceans.
I think China would have to set up bases in Canada and Mexico to
and they
be
never
successful.
would. It never happened.
No, it's not economically viable.
Yeah. I think it's pretty. I mean, I understand what you're saying, Randy, but I think it's pretty far-fetched no matter what, just because the logistics of it all. You can't fight a war from the other side of the world unless you're already there.
Yeah, but Russia is just a few miles away. I mean, does the Bering Sea, does it freeze up totally? Or
Yeah, it does. Yeah, people cross it on the land rigs and stuff. But, I mean, even then, getting some real hardware across would be pretty difficult. Plus, I don't think they have that many big bases in the eastern portion of their country anyways, because it's pretty harsh.
Their west coast or east coast is just like, it's like the west coast here. It's like, area around Nome. But
it's pretty barren.
Yeah, in fact, if you look pictures at it, it looks like identical to Nome. I noticed the village portions. But,
And plus, the good thing is America's the one warmongering. The rest of the countries are just trying to survive. I mean, Russia, they just want to survive economically right now.
Well, even if they put equipment on Alaska's shores, they'd still have to get it across Alaska all the way, down to Fairbanks, down through Canada.
And then you just take out the Yukon Bridge. How are they going to get across there? They're going to have to do this and that. I mean, it's not very feasible.
Right.
It's not very feasible.
All right,
Randy. Thanks.
Bye.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, caller. We got a couple minutes. Go ahead.
Real quick, Josh?
Yes, sir.
Bill, how are you?
Good. How are you doing, Bill?
Well, I wanted to ask the original caller today. You had your show about the soft code and local laws like us. We have the borough police out looking at smokestacks now and stuff like that. But
I didn't even get into that. I thought about it because he'd probably just like, I'm off the phone. This is ridiculous.
The other thing, though, I want to give condolence to our friend Carl Burgraff. Won't be able to call anymore. He passed away, and Trio Fouts passed away, and we lost Winston the past year or so. So us old ones are leaving, and we all love them, and we are a family, and we treasure what everybody had to say. And you have us all on tape somewhere.
Yep, sure do.
Anyway,
you're on the internet.
Thank you very much, guys, and keep up the good work.
All right, thank you. That's why the older folks, you got to call in and pass your wisdom down to the younger guys while you got the chance, right? And we will record it for the ages. And then people literally all over the world can listen to it. And they do.
Yep.
All over the world. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the hour here pretty much, Mike.
Okay.
I'm going to go. Doesn't look very exciting outside. Another cold day. Hey, at least it's not 20 below. We're pretty lucky. I mean, when I went outside, I was prepared for the blast to the face, like, oh, it's cold. And then
I was like that last night when I went out to plug in the truck.
I was like, wow, maybe I'm already used to 20 below. Sweet. Mm-hmm. No, not so much. All right, folks, you have a good week. Be safe and stay warm. We'll hopefully see you next week here on Patriots Lament. Have a good day.
Later.